strip poker with these three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's midday on Monday, the 20th of November.
Taking to the streets, Just Stop Oil vow to protest every single day from today until they win. Right now, they're beginning a demonstration in central London. We'll be there live.
And Rwanda back on the rocks. Rishi Sunak faces a cabinet revolt over plans to ignore the ECHR and salvage his migrants policy.
And MPs under threat. Pro-Palestine protests target MPs' homes and offices. Is this action a threat to democracy or democracy in action?
And with the Chancellor set to deliver his autumn statement on Wednesday, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak says he believes in cutting taxes, quote, carefully and sustainably. But what does this actually mean? We'll be discussing all of that, plus much more, after your headlines with Sophia.
Good afternoon, it's 1 minute past 12. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. The Prime Minister says he believes cutting taxes should be done carefully and sustainably. It's one of 5 long-term decisions Rishi Sunak says he's making for the economy. The Prime Minister says he also wants to reduce debt, build sustainable energy, support businesses and deliver world-class education. His comments come ahead of Wednesday's autumn statement.
So now that inflation is halved and our growth is stronger, meaning revenues are higher, we can begin the next phase and turn our attention to cutting tax. We will do this in a serious, responsible way, based on fiscal rules to deliver sound money and alongside the independent forecasts of the Office of Budget Responsibility. And we can't do everything all at once. It will take discipline, and we need to prioritise. But over time, we can and we will cut taxes.
There are growing hopes that dozens of hostages held by Hamas in Gaza may soon be released. US, Israel and Qatari mediators say a deal is edging closer. More than 200 people were taken by Hamas on the 7th of October. So far, only 4 have been released. It comes after the Israeli military claimed Hamas hid and murdered hostages at Gaza's main hospital. IDF released video of what it says are hostages being kept in Al-Shifa hospital. Meanwhile, the first group of premature babies evacuated from Al-Shifa hospital have arrived in Egypt. Gaza's health ministry says a joint operation by the UN and Palestinian Red Crescent has made the move possible. It comes as Israel continues its ground offensive. The Hamas-run health ministry says an airstrike on a hospital has killed at least 12 people in the north of the territory. The Israeli military has also released footage which it says shows a 55-metre-long terror tunnel 10 metres deep underneath the Al-Shifa hospital. It says the footage clearly proves that numerous buildings in the hospital's complex are being used by Hamas as cover for terrorist activities. Hamas has denied the allegations. A man has been arrested on suspicion of murder following the death of a woman in Dewsbury. Officers were called to a property in Ravensthorpe area last night. West Yorkshire Police say a woman in her 20s was found seriously injured and she died a short time later. Ofsted is not fit for purpose, according to an inquiry. The Beyond Ofsted inquiry called for transformational change and said it found Ofsted as having a detrimental impact on schools, which some perceive as toxic. The inquiry, chaired by former Schools Minister Lord Jim Knight and sponsored by the National Education Union, recommends the school inspection system should be overhauled. The inquiry was launched amid calls for a revamp of the UK school rating system, which uses one-word judgments, following the death of head teacher Ruth Perry in January. And a pool player who bought a table after winning the lottery has won a bronze medal at the European Championships. Neil Jones had just £13 in his pocket when he and his partner won £2.4 million just before Christmas in 2010. One of his first purchases was a pool table, with the 59-year-old honing his skills and going on to represent England. Mr. Jones spoke of the honour of representing his country and winning bronze at the European Black Ball Championships in Malta. This is GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on your digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Tom and Emily.
Thanks, Sophia. Now, I just wanted to take a moment to sort of sit back and sort of welcome everyone to this new show, Good Afternoon Britain.
Yes. It's been a good morning so far. Been rushing around trying to put together this fantastic show for you this afternoon, so I do hope you're enjoying it so far. And what we're going to be going to first is something that's occurring in central London for not the first time, not the second time, not the third time, not the 100th time, but yet more Just Stop Oil protests, Tom.
Indeed, starting from midday and indeed going across this week, we've got new protests. Just Stop Oil is beginning its Take to the Streets campaign, and there is so much more that they're going to try and disrupt and really get in the way of.
Well, essentially, it's yet more threats from this group, is it not? They will continue to disrupt people's lives until they win. What exactly win means, presumably it means no new oil and gas.
Well, you say that, Emily, but they're called Just Stop Oil. And yet all this weekend they've been tweeting about Gaza, Israel and Palestine. They've staged sit-ins about a ceasefire. It seems to me that they're not just about oil at all. They're about many more things. But we will be speaking to a spokesperson from the group and get their side of the story as well. We do want to hear all perspectives on this programme on Good Afternoon Britain.
Yes, Ray Addison will be there in the thick of it for us too in just one moment. And just one more thing. I don't know if you noticed, Tom, but there's some footage that's going around that has been called shocking. Now, this is about something rather different. This is about indoctrination in our schools, or at least campaigners are calling it that, because essentially one school teacher has been using the story of a transgender teddy. People are saying it's indoctrinating children.
Well, I suppose we'll get to that a little bit later, and plenty to discuss about what's being taught in schools. But let's cross now live to Trafalgar Square and get the very latest with GB News reporter Ray Addison. Now, Ray, we understand people are beginning to gather. What exactly are Just Stop Oil planning?
Well, yes, you can see behind me, there's around about 25 members of Just Stop Oil that I can see. In fact, I'll step out of the way just so you can have a quick pan across. Ben can pan across, we can show them. We can see there two men at the moment just holding Just Stop Oil sign, and around about 25 activists, a similar number of press and police officers as well. And it's a bit weird because we've got this beautiful location here on a rather cold but quite sunny Monday afternoon here in Trafalgar Square. We've got lots of school groups. So just a minute ago, they've gone now, but we had a large group of school children who've presumably just been to the National Gallery enjoying their Monday afternoon school trip. And then to their right was this group of Just Stop Oil activists. Now, we spoke to one of their organisers earlier on, and he was saying that this is going to be the starting point every day at midday. They're going to gather here for an unprecedented 7 days of disruptive action across London. They wouldn't reveal where they're going to move on to today. However, we do know they are planning to move on once everybody has arrived here, and then they're going to start to cause the kind of disruption that we have seen since the group was formed back in 2022. Of course, we know that there's been well over 2,000 people arrested who've taken part in that action. We know that well over 130 people have actually ended up doing prison time as well, but it hasn't put the organisation off. It hasn't put their members off, and we've got the latest round of action starting here today. 7 days initially. However, they did tell me that they're planning to just keep going every single day until the government do what they want.
Any other causes down there being represented? Because we often see, as Tom said just a moment ago, that it may be a Just Stop Oil protest, but you often see lots of other causes join in the fun.
Well, no specific flags or causes per se that I can see, although a number of the activists are wearing a number of badges, you know, the CND badge and all that kind of stuff. Some of the sort of typical kind of images and similar campaigns and causes that you might expect. But in terms of dedicated protests, it's just the Just Stop Oil one that I can see at the moment, although I know that it kind of merged into a ceasefire campaign, one of the protests that was here the other day. We do know that a number of people here, at least two people here, were a previous protest on Saturday. We believe they may have been arrested at that protest, and so that'll be interesting to see what is happening and why they're here today and how the police will react to them. Police, of course, being very, very responsive. They just want to try and contain it as much as possible. Liaison officers saying to me that they're just going to try and persuade them not to disrupt ordinary London motorists' lives. However, you know, it remains to be seen how successful that is.
Pretty placid right now, standing on Trafalgar Square, waiting to go on and cause disruption. It's pretty interesting that there are sort of police behind you standing there just sort of waiting to see what happens next. I suppose there can't be any preemptive arrests going on, but we do know these people are gathering in order to then cause potentially illegal disruption.
Yeah, absolutely. That's their stated aim, although at the moment, as far as I'm aware, they're not committing any crimes. They're standing peacefully. The police will be liaising with them to see what their intentions are. If they were to cause some kind of disturbance to the peace here in Trafalgar Square, then of course that will be dealt with. But the stated aim is to meet here, to gather here, and then to go on to a secondary location. That's where the major disruption will be caused. However, if this is the start of 7 days of major disruption, they may not be very happy with the numbers. Only around, like I said, 25 so far, and more interest from the press and police officers, as you can see. We'll have a little pan around, just give you a bigger picture of this. As you can see there, you can see a large group of obviously tourists here, mostly tourists, looking quite confused. People coming up to us actually and asking us what was going on and why are people doing this. Then we've got the police who are coordinating, lots of school children, and then if Ben just pans round here, you can see right in front of Ben now, that's the press pack, and then up on the steps we got Just Stop Oil. What few there are of them right now. However, that's not to say that number isn't going to swell. The meeting time was 12, but maybe it was 12 for 12:30, and they're going to go on and cause major disruption.
Well, perhaps some people are waiting for their lunch break if they're at work.
You're assuming they have jobs? I don't know, goodness me. Ray, thank you so much. It warms the heart, really, to see how few people have turned out there. Although it does make me think, with all the attention there, with all the press there, with the police there, might this be a diversionary tactic? Might Just Stop Oil actually have got some sort of secret secondary location that people are gathering in? Just a thought. We'll keep our cameras and eyes peeled for disruption as it happens in central London throughout the next few hours. But I have to say, in terms of optics alone, perhaps not the best start for Just Stop Oil's extraordinary week.
I'm sure that Ray will be our eyes and ears on this. He'll find out if there is a secondary plan.
He'll follow them, yeah.
He'll chase them, follow them, keep you up to date on what happens. Because we have seen, have we not, how much disruption this group can cause in London and across the country, actually, not least on our motorways.
Absolutely.
And in our national galleries.
But moving from, hopefully, away from disruption and towards perhaps stability or even growth, because business leaders and senior politicians, including the Chancellor, have attended the Confederation of British Industry conference in London today, with the CBI calling on Jeremy Hunt to save the UK from low growth and lost opportunities.
Yes, and with the autumn statement just a few days away, pressure is mounting for the government to look at tax cuts and start to ease the burden on businesses and people.
Well, joining us now is Liam Halligan, our very own economics and business editor, with On the Money. Now, Liam, it is a fascinating week. Of course, in the run-up to the autumn statement, there is so much speculation, so much campaigning. We've heard some words from the Prime Minister this morning as well. Just give us a little rundown on what are all of the rumoured things that the Chancellor is considering for Wednesday's statement.
Indeed, I think the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, and indeed Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, they've done a bit of what we call in the journalism trade a reverse ferret in the last 72 hours or so. Since it became clear last week that inflation is sharply down, it fell from 6.7% during the year to September to 4.6% during the year to October. Sunak meeting his pledge that inflation was going to halve since January. The Prime Minister in a speech this morning, and indeed the Sunday papers were full of speculation about this, the Prime Minister in a speech this morning said, now is the time for tax cuts, now that we've got inflation under control. He talked about cutting taxes in a serious and responsible way, and that, of course, raises huge speculation for Wednesday's statement. The autumn statement is kind of like a budget statement that you get in the spring. We think it's going to be Wednesday lunchtime. And there are some tax-cutting options now very much on the table being purposefully floated in the press. Let's have a look at some of them. The first one, Tom and Emily, is to make permanent what we call full expensing, to extend full expensing. Full expensing was introduced earlier this year, and it lasts for 3 years, and it means that companies can offset their investment against their corporation tax bill. So if companies have got deep pockets, they can raise finance, they can then invest and save money on their tax. Of course, small companies often don't have the ability to invest, so that really helps big companies more. A second one that's being very heavily promoted by my paper, the Sunday Telegraph, is to cut inheritance tax. Now, the cliche is just 4% of households pay inheritance tax, but lots more think that they're going to, and it's a very unpopular tax. You're basically taxing what's already been taxed during someone's life when they die. So we may see a raising of the threshold of inheritance tax from £325,000 a year. We may see the rate of inheritance tax 40% cut back. A third option is to raise frozen tax thresholds. What does that mean? Well, the thresholds that kicks in when you pay the basic rate of income tax, about 20 grand, 40 odd grand, 45 odd grand when you start paying the upper rate of tax. They've been frozen from 2 years ago under Rishi Sunak when he was Chancellor, all the way till 2028. That drags more and more people into those top tax brackets. So mid-ranking nurses and teachers are now top-rate taxpayers, and that means more of us pay more tax. The final idea is one that I've been floating, is to increase the personal allowance from £12,570. What does that mean? That means that you start paying tax when you start earning just over £12,000 a year, which is about a third of the average wage. These little part-time jobs often, or lower income jobs. Some economists like me are saying just raise that to 20 grand, take 4 or 5 million low-income workers out of tax altogether, then you won't have to pay them in work benefits. It's much easier, quicker, it makes work pay, and it's the kind of thing, Tom and Emily, which will get a lot of the economic inactivity in this country moving. We've got a couple of million people who haven't really gone back to work post-lockdown, and I personally think if you raise that starting rate of income tax to £20,000, you'll get a lot more of those people back to work. They'll pay more tax. It won't cost the Exchequer anything over the medium term. It could even make money for the Chancellor.
Is all of this, and thank you for setting out all of those different areas which could be cut, but is this a little bit wishful thinking, talking about cutting taxes? Because looking at Rishi Sunak's words, he's been quite careful, hasn't he? He said over time we can and cut and will cut taxes. He's talked about being very responsible and, what else did he say, sustainable with the potential for tax cuts. Do you think we actually will see any big changes when it comes to our taxes? Will we see cuts? What do you think?
I would have said probably not up until the last 2 or 3 days. I'd have said, and I've been saying it a lot on your show, that I think if there are tax cuts in this spring budget, in this autumn statement on Wednesday, they'll be aimed at business, so things like extending full expensing, maybe giving high street businesses a holiday on their business rate, which they pay, but the online retail giants don't pay. That seems to be something that's harming our high street. I'd have originally said I think these tax cuts on Wednesday will be oriented towards business. But I think with what the Chancellor and particularly the Prime Minister have been saying just this morning, it's going to be very hard for them now not to heavily signal or implement personal tax cuts too. That's why I think they could be working on a plan to raise these personal tax thresholds, or at least unfreeze them to end that stealth tax. Now, it may be there's been a fashion in recent years for chancellors and prime ministers to announce tax cuts that come in 6 or 12 months' time. So then they get kind of 2 positive sets of headlines for the announcement and then for the implementation itself. It may be that they do something along those lines, announcing something that will come in the spring in order to give households and companies more of a break so they can plan. But look, there's actually very little fiscal headroom here. There's a bit more than we thought, but the public finances are tight. Tax cuts will have to be funded in the first instance by borrowing. And Emily and Tom, we're currently spending over 10% of all government revenue on debt interest. It's the second biggest thing on the government's balance sheet after the NHS. So there's not much room to play with here, but I think the fiscal pressure on the Prime Minister and the Chancellor is actually outweighed now by the political pressure. So many of their backbenchers absolutely baying for tax cuts. There's talk about letters going into Sir Graham Brady, possible votes of no confidence again, the Tories changing leader yet again before the general election. Yes, believe it or not, this is being talked about. So I think to calm the nerves, while it will mean taking a slight risk with financial markets, to calm nerves within the party and indeed to try and break that stranglehold that Keir Starmer's party has on the polls, a 25-point lead in the polls now for Labour. I do think the Tories will come up with some kind of personal tax cut on Wednesday, and I wouldn't have said that just a few hours ago.
I think the Conservatives are certainly managing expectations, but thanks for the politics behind it, because that's the truth, isn't it? The opposition is coming from within the party rather than from Labour when it comes to tax cuts.
And Liam is so right about what has changed in the last 24, even 12 hours with regard to what is being discussed. We heard from the Chancellor, we've heard from the Prime Minister. Things are moving quickly. Liam, thank you so much for your updates, and we'll, of course, be back with you if there's anything more developing there. But, of course, lots more coming up for you this afternoon.
Yes, as Islamist suspects go missing after illegally crossing the Channel, we'll be asking why Britain's borders seem so impossible to police.
And we'll be getting to the thoughts of our panel as we're joined by Sunday Telegraph columnist Janet Daly and former Labour Defence Minister Ivor Kaplan for their takes on the stories that Britain is talking about. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. I suppose we should say that after every ad break, shouldn't we?
We should, I think so.
We're finding how to do this as it goes. But we want to talk now about migration, because, of course, we've seen hundreds more people cross the channel in small boats, particularly as the weather has become calmer in recent days.
Yes, and there have been reports, though we can't verify them entirely, reports over the weekend and in the papers this morning about potential terror suspects using the channel, using small boats and then disappearing into this country. So, of course, there are ongoing national security concerns about the situation. And so we're going to talk to Kevin Saunders, former Chief Immigration Officer at the UK Border Force, because he knows a thing or two about what's going on. Kevin, there have been reports over the past couple of days about potential terror suspects using the channel to get into the UK and potentially plotting terror attacks in this country after they've crossed using the channel in this way. How widespread is this problem?
Well, this isn't anything new. This has been suggested ever since small boats have been operating. The big problem is that we just have no idea who is coming across the channel. None whatsoever. We've seen murderers, we've seen rapists, we've seen everybody you can think of coming across, and we just don't know who it is, and we don't catch them unless we're incredibly lucky.
I suppose that's the issue, of course. Many people we know throw documents overboard before arriving via small boat. There are other ways that people could claim asylum into the country. People could come in on tourist visas, for example, and then claim. But choosing to go by small boat, I suppose, presents all manner of issues because it is that element of anonymity.
Yes, and that's why they do it. The reason these people are risking life and limb is because they don't want to be identified. And you're quite right. The bottom of the channel is full of identity documents that have been thrown into the sea. And people just do not want to know because despite what the politicians tell you, it is very, very difficult to assess an asylum claim if you don't know who the person is, you don't know where the person's come from, you don't know their name, you don't know their date of birth, you don't know anything about them at all. That's why it takes so long to assess an asylum claim.
I think a lot of people simply do not want to believe that there could possibly be a national security threat coming from the people who are crossing the channel. Many people will talk about how every single person on those boats is escaping persecution, is definitely an asylum seeker, and people don't seem to want to see what the evidence before their eyes, that unfortunately some people may be using this route for nefarious means. Another story that we've seen, and this is something that keeps being considered by the Home Office, or at least reportedly, Home Office ministers considering granting an effective amnesty to thousands of migrants who've crossed through the channel. Is this just a way of them getting through the backlog? Surely that must be a security threat in one way or another.
Well, everything about it is a security threat. The trouble is, we have heard about amnesty, and we've had amnesties before. We've had a number of amnesties under different governments. It doesn't really make sense to try and spend ages assessing a claim if you know that the person is from a country that you can't return them to. An example is the Yemen. We're not going to be returning anybody to the Yemen at all. So you may as well throw your hands up in the air. You won't give them asylum, you'll give them humanitarian protection. And basically that means they stay in the UK.
So that means that essentially anyone who arrives by illegal means to this country from the Yemen will therefore have the right to stay in the UK?
More or less, yes. Because we can't return people to the Yemen because it's a war zone. And it's, well, we just can't, we're not allowed to. International law will not allow us to return people to a war zone.
And isn't this the idea behind having a safe third country whereby people who have come to the UK illegally can be removed to in a safe way? And, of course, there are questions over whether or not Rwanda is that safe country. The Supreme Court, of course, last week highlighted risks that they think people might be sent on from Rwanda to unsafe places. But if those risks can be ironed out, would Rwanda therefore be a solution to that problem?
Oh, yes, completely. But the trouble is, at the moment, the the Supreme Court doesn't believe what the Rwandan government is saying. There is nothing wrong with the policy. The policy is quite legal. The trouble is that the Rwandan government has, according to the Supreme Court, dodgy human rights issues. So that's why we can't remove them at the moment to Rwanda.
Well, let's see if a new treaty irons that out. Of course, many battles, not least legal and parliamentary, to go forward and try and iron that one out.
And our cabinet ministers are fighting with one another.
When are they not?
About whether we ignore the European Court of Human Rights, whether this treaty is going to work. Lots of people with different views, some more hardline than others. Will we ever solve this problem? Thank you very much indeed, Kevin Saunders, former Chief Immigration Officer at the UK Border Force. We've got lots more coming up for you in today's show.
Yes, not least as controversial libertarian Javier Milei wins Argentina's presidential election. We'll be asking, is the populist tide unstoppable? There he is, with a chainsaw. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News.
It's 12:32. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister says he believes cutting taxes should be done carefully and sustainably. It's one of 5 long-term decisions Rishi Sunak says he's making for the economy. The Prime Minister says he also wants to reduce debt, build sustainable energy, support businesses and deliver world-class education. His comments come ahead of Wednesday's autumn statement. There are growing hopes that dozens of hostages held by Hamas in Gaza may soon be released. US, Israel and Qatari mediators say a deal is edging closer. More than 200 people were taken by Hamas on the 7th of October. So far, only 4 have been released. It comes after the Israeli military claimed Hamas hid and murdered hostages at Gaza's main hospital. IDF released video of what it says are hostages being kept in Al-Shifa hospital. Meanwhile, more than 24 premature babies evacuated from Al-Shifa hospital have arrived in Egypt. Gaza's health ministry says a joint operation by the UN and Palestinian Red Crescent has made the move possible. It comes as Israel continues its ground offensive. The Hamas-run health ministry says an airstrike on a hospital has killed at least 12 people in the north of the territory. A man has been arrested on suspicion of murder following the death of a woman in Dewsbury. Officers were called to a property in the Ravensthorpe area last night. West Yorkshire Police says a woman in her 20s was found seriously injured and she died a short time later. And you can get more on all those stories by visiting our website at gbnews.com.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Now, we wanted to get and see what you have been writing in at home throughout the programme, and there have been a huge deluge of emails, not least on our last conversation about Britain's borders. I wanted to bring one comment from Gordon, who has written in saying, I've sent this about 9 times and no one's yet answered it, so I think it's fair chance that you get this heard. Just stop the manufacturers making the small boats all over Europe. They must know they're selling them to people smugglers. I suppose it's an idea, but I do think that sometimes people do buy small boats for legitimate purposes, so perhaps it's not the most tactical solution.
I've seen Border Control asked that exact question, and they say that's a very good point, but presumably as soon as one supplier gets stopped, then another pops up, just as with the smuggling gangs themselves.
And sometimes people do use boats for, civic purposes.
Yeah. Well, yeah, OK. Yeah, but they're getting bigger and bigger and more robust, aren't they?
Have you ever been on a rigid inflatable boat just bouncing across the Mediterranean? It's quite fun.
Quite possibly. I have to rack my brain. But yes, on Just Stop Oil, lots of people are getting in touch to say we shouldn't be covering it. We shouldn't be giving them the oxygen of the press. But others think that perhaps they should go off to New Delhi and sort out the smog there, for starters.
Yeah, or indeed Beijing, but I'm not sure that they'd be quite allowed to protest in the same way that they have been in the United Kingdom.
Well, I am absolutely delighted to say that joining us now in the studio is columnist for the Sunday Telegraph, Janet Daly, who's written an absolutely fantastic piece yesterday, I believe it was. It went live. And the former Labour MP and Defence Minister, Ivor Kaplan. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Now, you wanted to start with the autumn statement.
Yeah.
We've been hearing all sorts about what we might have to expect. You heard Liam Halligan probably earlier describing the potential for tax cuts. What do you think, Janet?
Well, all sorts is definitely the word. I have never in my journalistic life, which goes back longer than I would care to admit, heard such conflicting briefing. We were being briefed on the paper. We are a Conservative newspaper, so you would expect us to have a good relationship with the government. And we were being briefed that inheritance tax was definitely on the table a week ago. And now that's all up in the air. And then we were hearing at one point that there was scarcely going to be any tax cuts at all. And then they're on again, because Rishi Sunak was talking this morning confidently about, the autumn statement is a kind of mini budget, right, which Gordon Brown introduced. There used to be something called budget purdah. You probably aren't old enough to remember this, but there was a time when no government minister was supposed to say anything that anticipated the measures in the budget because it could affect the the
Well, and there was one time when the Chancellor of the Exchequer resigned for having briefed a journalist about the budget.
That was in 1960s. And then we all stood by that for many, many years in political circles, for sure. And to see the sort of range that Janet and colleagues in the media have had to put up with seem to me to be completely inappropriate.
Yeah.
I just think it's too much.
And it's chaotic. It makes the government look even more shambolic.
To some extent, we've gone from no information to some information to too much contradictory information. Is this not perhaps full circle? There's so much being said that, in effect, nothing's been said at all.
Is it really? You have to ask yourself, is this some deliberate policy? Is it, that I think this is clever? Or is it actually a shambles? And it really looks as if now they were flying a kite over the inheritance tax. And they got scared off because Labour politicians were going to say, oh, you're giving tax cuts to the rich. And it will only help the richest. That's, well, I can't use the word, but that's complete nonsense. It's 20 years out of date. The very rich now can
escape... Because of housing wealth.
Yes, but also the very rich find it much easier to escape inheritance tax. With a globalised economy, you can move your assets around the world.
So it's the squeezed middle that get hit by this tax.
Everybody who owns a house in the southeast of England is going to be hit by inheritance tax. In another 10 years' time, it'll be a huge swathe of the population.
There is a real case, sorry.
Oh, no, go on, go on.
I was just going to say there is a real case for looking again at the whole inheritance tax issue. I don't think anyone doubts that.
Oh, I'm just going to interrupt you, Ivor, for a second. We've got live pictures coming in now from Trafalgar Square, where it looks like there has been some sort of advancing protest, perhaps a slow walk. I wonder if we can speak to Ray Addison, who is there live. We can't speak to Ray at this time, but it does look like there is some movement there. We're going to see if we can establish contact with Ray. I wonder, Ray, can you hear me?
I can, Tom, yes. Can you hear me?
Can indeed. What is going on there on the square?
So we understand that the Just Stop Oil protesters, which has swollen to about 50 people now, are going to march down Whitehall towards Parliament. So they've left the steps of Trafalgar Square now, just in front of the National Gallery, and they're about to go onto the road. Now, the police are flanking them. There's a number of photographers as well. As I said, the group is now about 50 large, and they're about to go onto the road now. We're about 3 metres away from the edge of the pavement now, and they're about to enter the road.
They're being escorted by police officers or police community support officers, and yet no arrests are being attempted. They're about to step onto the road. Oh, a policeman is shouting. Let's listen to what he's saying.
7 of the Public Order Act. You're more than welcome to carry in your protest. If you block the road and cause disruption, you could be arrested under Section 7 of the Public Order Act.
That's very interesting indeed, isn't it, to hear him say that, making them know that if they block, presumably, the roads there, that they may find themselves in a cell. Shall we leave Ray there for now and come back to our discussion in the studio?
We'll be back to Ray if there are any dramatic arrests being made.
Because what you were saying there was very interesting about inheritance tax. You think that it needs to be completely reworked.
I think there is an absolute case, and part of that Janet has already said, about taking inheritance tax as it is now and changing it so that it's more beneficial to everyone rather than just a small group of people. I think about 4%. If you look at the actual numbers, actually benefit
not for long.
From
not for long.
Tax. Well,
it'll be 12% in about 10 years.
I don't know whether that's a thing that either party would do, but it does seem to me to be a sensible thing forward. It was wrong when I was a government minister, and I can remember us talking about it, but nothing ever happened.
Yeah.
And you know, that's a frustration, as you know, Tom.
And yet now it seems that more retail-orientated policy is being discussed. We've been hearing this morning about national insurance or raising thresholds for income tax. I mean, Janet, do you think that this is perhaps the albatross that Rishi Sunak has worn around his neck now for 2.5 years since the national insurance increase, for which he was slated, probably the reason why he lost to Liz Truss 2 summers ago?
Possibly. I mean, the national insurance thing was quite extraordinary, had quite extraordinary political impact. But I do think that raising the thresholds on income tax is absolutely essential. It is absurd that people are paying tax at such a low level. When I speak to American friends and I tell them the rates of tax that are paid in this country, they wonder why anybody bothers to work at all. The top rate of income tax for millionaires in America is 37%. And you don't pay that until you're earning about $500,000. I mean,
such a difference.
Yeah, such a difference.
In terms of incentives, it's really quite important. But if they gave away any tax cut now for the rich, it would just be
But
terrible.
if you
optics,
raise the
wouldn't it?
thresholds, it wouldn't just be for the rich. Raise the thresholds at the bottom, and in fact, you could leave the one. I mean, they shouldn't leave the one at the top, but if they wanted to be politically cute, they could do that. They could raise the threshold for the minimum level at which you start paying tax, 12,500 to 20,000. Brilliant.
I mean, the issue about those numbers is that simply, if you do that, you're putting a lot of money into that. You probably can't do anything else.
Except that people become more productive.
Well, they do. But one thing I was just going to say about the budget and how it goes with journalists, etc., and ministers and everything else, is simply that there were sort of strictish rules when we were in office, which said there were things that Gordon Brown, rightly as Chancellor of the Exchequer, wanted to do without anyone knowing, and there was a very small group of people who knew what was actually coming out.
The independence of the Bank of England, only about 4 people knew before it was...
Well, the independence of the Bank of England, interestingly, wasn't in the manifesto. And yet, 6 days after the election in 1997, the bank was independent. You know, that was something that had been discussed in Labour circles, but wasn't in it, because if you do that, you're going to, you know, the business community could just think, oh my goodness, this is going to be terrible.
It's got to happen immediately as soon as it's announced, otherwise it has market-moving effects.
Exactly, and that's exactly why I think it was the Friday after, so obviously Thursday, Friday, the following Friday it became law.
Wow.
We are in an extraordinary position where we are briefed the complete opposite to what we were briefed the day before. But anyway, shall we... Ivor, I'd like to get your opinion. Are civil servants lazy and taking liberties? We've seen reports here, Tory MPs hitting out at civil servants who are working from beach instead of from their desk, presumably.
Well, if you're working on the beaches in Brighton and Hove yesterday, you would have been struggling because it was very, very wet, which reminded me of Brighton Pride this year.
I'm not sure it's Brighton they're talking about.
No, I don't think it's Brighton they have in mind. No.
Killing me with all the rain. It's not always the best place to be. But if someone's on a beach and still doing some work, what's wrong with that?
Do you think that's OK?
I do think it's
civil
okay.
servant standards, surely.
Are they there working, or are they there on holiday and doing some work?
Well, working in the civil service is a team enterprise, right? You're not self-employed, you're not doing your own thing. You're dealing with the department and you're communicating with people and you're talking the policies through. I mean, one of the things that might be increasing the sort of arrogance that we've heard about in the civil service is because these people are isolated. They don't have to go into the office and talk about their views and discuss their opinions and be influenced by what their colleagues think. And that's horrendous. I mean, the civil service, you know, this is not just a club of people who are running a little private business. They're running the government.
Last week, there's going to be a new diktat across government that for at least 3 days a week, civil servants must come into the office. I can remember, which seems a little low to me.
I can remember Jacob Rees-Mogg saying that at one time, leaving notes on people's desks.
Yes, he put out little notes.
Is the business actually going down that route too?
That's
in the city now,
but that's their decision.
Yes, that's right. That's their decision.
You must have 3 days in the office. I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do.
But they're not running the government. They're not running the government. They're running a little, you know, whatever, jewellery business or insurance companies.
I meant a slightly bigger business.
Yeah, no, but I mean,
have you heard of TWATs? I'm sure I'm allowed to say Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursdays. That's the new working week in many cities across the UK. It is extraordinary. Getting public transport into work on Mondays and Fridays is empty.
I have to say, just a little anecdote. My hairdresser told me that Saturday used to be their big day. They were absolutely crammed, you know, one appointment after another. And she said now Friday is as busy as Saturday, and she said, but a lot of people come in with their laptops and they log on to the Wi-Fi and they say, do you mind if I work while you do this? And they actually are working on the Friday at the hairdresser. But somehow maybe I'm being old-fashioned and purist about this, but that's not what's going to work.
I should also just add that today, for the first time, to get here to Paddington, I got on the Elizabeth line. Which seems appropriate given you've got this new show. I didn't even know about this new show until I got here. But all the lines were working fine this morning, you know, and obviously I come from Brighton too.
Yeah,
so,
well, Just Stop Oil clearly not able to stop the tubes, although it does look like there is some disruption on the roads with one protester perhaps deliberately lying down there. Yes, being arrested.
No glue
currently
involved
being
by the looks
arrested.
of things,
No glue. They've given
No
up on the glue,
adhesives.
I think.
I think they're just getting to them quicker.
You know what? The police have certainly stepped things up when it comes to Just Stop Oil. They've had a lot of criticism, of course, over how they've chosen to police or not police the pro-Palestine protests. But here we can see they are willing to drag these people off the road there. That's in central London, outside Trafalgar Square, I believe, where Ray Addison is taking these shots.
Yeah.
And
without making them any coffee first.
See, these people are very passionate about their cause, Janet.
Yeah.
Are they?
Wrongly.
Are they?
Well, yeah, I suppose, but I mean, I don't know what they're passionate about because it's so incoherent. What is it they're demanding? Do they actually think they can hold a whole country to hostage until they get what they want? That's not what the democratic process is.
Can you imagine if any other
about.
Political movement was so arrogant to decide that they're going to lie in roads until, I don't know, inheritance tax was abolished or any other political outcome?
Yeah. I mean,
That was a long way.
But I mean, this is such an unrealistic demand as well, to stop even people who are absolutely adamant about global warming and climate change and net zero and all of that admit that we're going to have to use fossil fuels for quite a few years.
It's why it's called net zero, because on net you have zero carbon emissions. You accept that there is some oil and gas still used where it has to be, and you offset it through other things. That's
right.
the whole. That's half of the word net zero.
No, I mean
I was amazed when all this started. I have to say, you know, and obviously you watch these things like we've seen in London over the last few weeks in terms of Palestine, etc. But on this issue, I can't find any reason.
No, there's no logic.
That it's sensible.
No.
And you know, running onto a cricket field.
Oh
yeah.
And things like this. What is that?
Jumping on. What was it? It was a pool tournament.
The snooker tournament.
Snooker.
Yeah, that was yes. Somebody suggested they try it at a darts match and see what happened.
They say stopping new oil and gas will save millions of lives, and there seems to be a complete. I don't seem to understand that oil has alleviated global poverty.
At the same time, these people are complaining that the Al Shifa hospital doesn't have any fuel.
Yes, exactly.
You need the fuel to save lives there, but potentially not elsewhere. It seems like there's cognitive dissonance going on.
And why are they not demonstrating in front of the Chinese embassy or the Indian embassy? Well, I can tell you why, actually. You know, there would be no messing around. So it's a very.
What if they tried to get in the embassy?
Oh, God help them! Yes. I mean, the interesting thing to me, just from a social point of view and my generation, is how many of these people are in their 60s and 70s. It's the old CND crowd.
Yes. The man lying on the road looks like he was... my goodness me. There is lots of people in this whole conversation say, you're stealing our future. This is about our future. I mean, how
well, your grandchildren's future, maybe. I mean...
There isn't... It's not exactly their Greta Thunberg, is it?
May I just say, because, Janet, we haven't got too much time, and I want to ask you about your comment piece. They gave it the title, Corrupted by Extremist Islamists, the left is now openly anti-British. And you use examples of recent
Can I point out that I don't write the headlines?
I know you don't. So that's why I want you to explain what you meant.
There's now it has become a left-wing jamboree. I mean, there are people holding up signs that say, queers for Palestine. The Palestine state that Hamas would be advocating would murder homosexuals. They would regard homosexuality as a sin against God that had to be punished by death. There are young women shouting, very, dedicated, vociferous young women shouting, who would be beaten to death by morality police for going out without their hair covered. I mean, this is crazy. And it's become a kind of jamboree for all left-wing dissidents. And it's really, I'm quite convinced, partly ignorance and bonding, kind of adolescent bonding, but it's also people who have accepted this white guilt, colonial guilt mentality in which everything that isn't Western is good and everything that is Western is bad.
It's all linked. We're looking at pictures now of Just Stop Oil. Just Stop Oil have been publishing on their social media feeds all weekend about freeing Gaza, about being anti-Israel, as if that's connected to the climate in any way, shape or form.
It's absolutely not.
Do you agree with that assessment that Janet?
Well, Janet is making absolutely sensible comments about where we are. I mean, this is absolutely not about left or right wing. I'm not even sure the British public actually are in the slightest bit interested in left and wing stuff. I think what they want to know is all the usual things that come out when you're...
It's going to be a cost of living election.
Cost of living, etc., etc. And I just think that we need to understand this ourselves.
Can I just...
We do only have 15 seconds, so if you're brief.
I was just going to say there was more to that article. I was also criticising the right-wing people who are criticising the Palestinian mobs for becoming too nativist. I really fear that they're going to be labelled fascists and there's going to be something in that. I don't want to see that happen.
Well,
there are
thank
some
you very
serious
much.
problems with the Palestinian Authority and how we get to two-state solution, but we will do that.
Thank you very much for joining us on the show. Janet Daly, Ira Kaplan, thank you very much indeed. We'll be coming straight back to Just Stop Oil and lots else after the break. This is Good Afternoon Britain.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 1 o'clock on Monday, the 20th of November.
Taking to the streets. Just Stop Oil vow to protest every day from today until they win. Right now, they're beginning a demonstration in central London, and we'll be there live.
Yes, it's all kicking off. And Rwanda back on the rocks. The Prime Minister faces a cabinet revolt over plans to ignore the ECHR and salvage his migrants policy.
And MPs under threat. Pro-Palestine protests have targeted MPs' homes and offices. Is this action a threat to democracy or democracy in action?
And with the Chancellor set to deliver his autumn statement on Wednesday, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has said he believes in cutting taxes, but carefully and sustainably.
We've been discussing that, haven't we? It's a curious one because, as Janet Daly was saying at the end of the last hour, there seems to have been briefing on just about every side of this issue. The government says one thing one day, or pretends to say one thing, or behind the scenes says one thing. We really don't know where we are.
But will there be any rabbits out of the hat, whatever they are? Whether it's inheritance tax, income tax thresholds, who knows what? Let us know what you want to see in that statement, or if you've given up altogether, let us know. We'll be discussing all of that, plus lots more after your headlines with Sophia.
Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 1. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has promised to cut taxes carefully and sustainably. Rishi Sunak says the government can move into the next phase of fixing the economy now that inflation has been halved. Speaking ahead of Wednesday's autumn statement, he identified 5 long-term goals, which include reducing debt, building sustainable energy, supporting business and delivering world-class education.
So now that inflation is halved and our growth is stronger, meaning revenues are higher, we can begin the next phase and turn our attention to cutting tax. We will do this in a serious, responsible way, based on fiscal rules to deliver sound money and alongside the independent forecasts of the Office of Budget Responsibility. And we can't do everything all at once. It will take discipline, and we need to prioritise. But over time, we can and we will cut taxes.
There are growing hopes that dozens of hostages held by Hamas in Gaza may soon be released. US, Israel and Qatari mediators say a deal is edging closer. More than 200 people were taken by Hamas on the 7th of October. So far, only 4 have been released. It comes after the Israeli military claimed Hamas hid and murdered hostages at Gaza's main hospital. IDF released video of what it says are hostages being kept in Al-Shifa hospital. Meanwhile, more than 24 premature babies evacuated from Al-Shifa hospital have arrived in Egypt. Gaza's health ministry says a joint operation by the UN and Palestinian Red Crescent has made the move possible. It comes as Israel continues its ground offensive. The Hamas-run health ministry says an airstrike on a hospital has killed at least 12 people in the north of the territory. A man has been arrested on suspicion of murder following the death of a woman in Dewsbury. Officers were called to a property in the Ravensthorpe area last night. West Yorkshire police say a woman in her 20s was found seriously injured and she died a short time later. Ofsted is not fit for purpose, according to an inquiry. The Beyond Ofsted inquiry called for transformational change and said it found Ofsted as having a detrimental impact on schools, which some perceive as toxic. The inquiry, chaired by former Schools Minister Lord Jim Knight and sponsored by the National Education Union, recommends a school inspection system should be overhauled. The inquiry was launched amid calls for a revamp of the UK's school rating system, which uses one-word judgments, following the death of head teacher Ruth Perry in January. And a pool player who bought a table after winning the lottery has won a bronze medal at the European Championships. Neil Jones had just £13 in his pocket when he and his partner won $2.4 million just before Christmas in 2010. One of his first purchases was a pool table, with the 59-year-old honing his skills and going on to represent England. Mr. Jones spoke of the honour of representing his country and winning bronze at the European Black Ball Championships in Malta. This is GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on your digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News.
Well, welcome back to Good Afternoon Britain. Before we kick off this hour, shall we have a very little sneak peek of our very own Nigel Farage undertaking his first bush tucker trial in the jungle?
Yes, let's.
Nice. A camel udder. Wow. And a sheep udder with a cow's teat.
There's nothing.
Did you prepare this yourselves, guys?
Not personally, no.
We can't take all the credit.
Nigel, you're smashing it. You're smashing it. This is...
Bit blooming tough.
Oh, Farage! Farage!
Does look quite moist, quite kind of creamy.
You have to describe it in front of me.
Goodness me. Well, I'm not sure that I'd enjoy eating... What was it? What is that?
That was
udder?
on ITV at 9 o'clock. Yeah, what was it?
Something udder. It was lamb's teat. And something else.
So he's eating a lamb's teat?
Yeah. To be
Right,
honest,
well...
I mean, I think on a spectrum of kangaroo penis to lamb's teat, I think I'd prefer lamb's teat. I don't know, maybe that's one for the audience at home.
Should we get that in writing for you, Tom?
Yeah, don't bring one in tomorrow, my goodness.
A lamb's teat? Yes, I'd probably prefer that to the alternative.
We're quite used to eating lamb, aren't we? It's like, is it really, is a teat that different from a leg?
Well, I don't know. Perhaps we can have a
Biology
trial
with
here.
Tom.
Nigel can tell us in person when he's back from the jungle, but I've got a feeling he might be in there for rather a long time. I think people are going to want to make him do the challenges. You know what? I watched it last night. And he immediately took on a leadership role. Did Nigel Farage. He started rallying the troops. He was good in terms of morale.
He was so magnanimous towards, especially when the YouTuber was sort of having a tough time with the snakes. He was like, oh, you can do it, you're all right, don't worry, it's very tough, all the rest of it.
I mean, bless her, she was
seems
squealing.
to be on his best behaviour. I wonder if perhaps after a few days not eating very well around the campfire with the rain, as it is currently raining down there in Australia, perhaps things will get more bad-tempered, perhaps the TV will get a bit better.
Yes,
but,
there were some interesting stills of Nigel Farage with his tongue out with snakes inside a box, and he was trying to get these stars out. Anyway, not something I'd like to do, but there you go, Nigel Farage, ever a trooper.
Well, moving from down under to slightly closer to home, the Prime Minister is reportedly facing a cabinet split over the government's next steps to deport migrants to Rwanda following last week's Supreme Court ruling.
Yes, so Rishi Sunak is under pressure from the right of his party to get the flights off the ground, and he's said to be considering a strategy of just ignoring the ECHR when it comes to their rulings.
Well, let's speak now to GB News political editor Christopher Hope, who's live in Westminster for us. And Christopher, this is a big disagreement, not least about the Prime Minister, but more to do with the Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, and perhaps our new Home Secretary, James Cleverly.
That's right, all comes down to whether it's a full-fat choice or a semi-skimmed one. Now, those on the right of the party want a full-fat option here to disregard the human rights of maybe people who arrive here legally by boat and then are sent back to Rwanda. They don't want their human rights to stop that happening. That's one idea. And we have, of course, Robert Jenrick is known to be a supporter of being harder to get this through. The Home Secretary, James Cleverly, is not seen to be or known to be a keen supporter of elements of the Rwanda plan that they were pushing through under Suella Braverman. He's nervous about it, as we understand. So that's where that division comes in. You've got others in the cabinet too. Alex Chalk, who's the Justice Secretary, Vicky Atkins, who's the Attorney General. Will they be willing to overrule and move away from the kind of treaties, the agreements the UK has signed decades ago on the international stage? That's where the debate is. We'll see probably this new treaty to try and ensure that any migrants who are processed in Rwanda can't be sent back to the countries they came from. That treaty should be published maybe as soon as Thursday, and then the actual legislation will be next week. The clock is ticking, don't forget. The PM, Rishi Sunak, told us last week, didn't he, want the first flights to take off in the spring, so that's by May next year. It takes 21 sitting days of Parliament to go through a treaty and establish it in the UK. We're not sure how long it will take in Rwanda, and after that, these new laws about human rights and how they're being treated must come to pass. It'll be a big battle. We may be even seeing Parliament sitting over Christmas, I'm afraid. So it's a pressure on the government to get this right. But I think for many people, the talking on immigration has ended and the government's got to act. That is understood and got, we are told, by Rishi Sunak. Certainly he seemed to make clear in that press conference I was in last week with him. But whether he delivers on that, that will define a lot of his record in government, Tom.
Very interesting indeed. Thank you very much indeed. Christopher Hope, our political editor there, live from central London. This is the headache that won't go away. And most people don't actually believe that the government is going to stop the boats, even though they want the government to stop the boats.
Certainly, but lots more happening today. Let's cross live now to Ray Addison with Just Stop Oil getting themselves arrested on Whitehall. Ray, what's the very latest?
Well, what we've seen this afternoon, Tom and Emily, is some pretty robust policing. To be honest with you, they went on to started the walk down Whitehall around about 12:30 this afternoon. Within about 3 minutes, they had been arrested and taken to the side of the road here to the pavement. And then an officer came along with about 50 other officers saying, right, it's time to get them lifted and shifted. And now they're starting to pick them up and move them into the police vans. I have to say the whole thing has been quite surreal. We've got the 50 Just Stop Oil protesters, some kind of YouTuber who's just been taking the mickey out of them, pretending to be a Just Stop Oiler himself and causing all kinds of disruption of his own. And then we've got somebody with a shopping trolley and a speaker and the United Nations flag playing Heal the World by Michael Jackson. It's just an absolute circus down here. However, I have to say the police have been very robust. They acted very, very swiftly. None of the hesitation that I've seen in previous Just Stop Oil protests. And if this is a sign of how things are going to continue across this 7 days of action by Just Stop Oil, then they're going to struggle, of course, to have a lengthy protest. Now, of course, their whole intention is to cause disruption and then get the media talking about it so they get that message of just stopping oil. But they're in the process now. Let's just turn to look at this. They're starting to pick people up. So bizarre. When they start to move these people, they go completely floppy and almost in a sort of a trance-like state. I've seen similar expressions on the faces of people who've just had an amazing massage, but very relaxed, very, very, very calm, a lot of the protesters who are being picked up. And now, like I said, they're being lifted and they're being shifted and they're going to stick them in the back of these police vans, and they're just getting rid of all of them now in the middle of Whitehall around here. And of course, like I said, around 50 protesters, all handled very, very quickly, very, very fast. Demonstration lasted for about 100 metres of slow walking before they were all removed from Whitehall. They got nowhere near Parliament at all. So in that sense, if that was the aim, it was a failure. If it was to get some attention, there's certainly plenty of press down here.
This is absolutely fascinating to watch because previous protests, the police have been accused, wrongly or rightly, of being a bit too soft touch when it comes to people disrupting the roads and things. It would appear from these shots that you're getting us that the police are being quite rigorous, let's say.
No, absolutely. They're not messing around today. They really do seem determined, and some of the protesters seeming to put up some kind of resistance, not very keen to go into the van. But to the van they certainly will be going, and that is where they are heading now. As I said, well over 50 police officers, and they're just doing this extremely methodically. And then we've got about 3 or 4 different police vans as well, and they're just picking them up and moving them one by one. As you can see, they're all ages of people, from the very young to the fairly old as well. And they are going in those vans, and this protest is well and truly over.
Well, Ray, thank you so much for bringing us the very latest there. Lots of drama on Whitehall. We'll be back with you as more happens, of course, but I'm delighted now to be joined in the studio by a Just Stop Oil spokesperson. Dr. Graham Buss is with us here. And hello. Dr. Graham, thank you so much for making the time.
My pleasure.
I suppose it is interesting. There is clearly this deliberate tactic to get arrested going on. People warned by the police there if they were to disrupt the road, that would be a breach of the Public Order Act. I suppose this is legitimate there, that the police are arresting your friends and colleagues.
Obviously, we would rather that the government met with our very simple demand of no new oil and gas, which is, of course, not just our demand, but also the demand of many organisations around the world. Even the Pope supports it. The International Energy Agency supports it. Most climate scientists, the vast majority, support our demand. It's a very simple demand, and we will carry on until that demand is met.
We've seen quite a lot of younger people. OK, these shots, they were older people, middle-aged, I would say, being dragged away. Some very old, actually. Some elderly people. But there's been quite a lot of recruitment when it comes to university students. And a lot of university students tend to be idealistic.
Yeah.
They have a worldview that they want to see implemented. Some would say maybe they're not always the most common sense or rational when it comes to their politics. And there seems to be an attempt for Just Stop Oil to recruit these young people. And I worry they get themselves into this kind of situation. They're then arrested. They may then have to spend time in a prison cell, and it badly impacts their future prospects, potentially.
Yes, I mean, that's a very good point. I think what you find... for a start, we are talking about adults here, aren't we? We're talking about adults,
but, you know, young minds.
People who can join the war, who could fight in wars,
yeah,
who could be presenters on your programme. We're talking about adults. Now, I would have said that they are making a very rational decision, because what they are trying to stop is a catastrophic breakdown of our society, which is what we're going to see unless we make changes.
But even if we stopped all new gas and oil in this country, in the North Sea, for example, that wouldn't affect the global temperature, would it? Because we see many other countries, massive economies, pumping out carbon emissions,
is your position
using
that
fossil
the UK
fuels.
isn't important, that it doesn't make any
Well,
difference?
no, but what I would remind viewers and listeners is that, of course, the UK has taken great efforts to reduce our carbon emissions, haven't we?
The reality of it is that we are not taking action fast enough. We're currently heading to conditions in which vast areas of the world will be unlivable, including we will see significant changes, as we already are in this country. So we will see the collapse of our economy, the collapse of our food systems, the collapse of our pensions, uninsurable housing. We're already
But will
seeing
stopping oil and gas
houses.
here stop that?
OK, so let's deal with that. Our government has said, and I've read Sunak reports on this, that we want to be a world leader. We want to be a world leader. And we want to be a world leader in addressing... Hang on, let me finish. In addressing climate change. He has said that quite categorically. And yet he is breaking his own position on... He's breaking the rules that he set up on addressing the climate change. He's reducing the amount of effort he's prepared to put into it. And he's licensing new oil and gas. Now, if we as a country, if we said we are going to stop new oil and gas, and then we go to COP28, that sends a massive message to all those other countries. We need to take that action.
So
we
it's
could
about,
be a world leader.
It's moral leadership rather than the amount of CO2 that we as a country put out. It's about what other countries might do following our lead. I do want to ask
I used to work for Shell, so let me just say... Now, if you look at what we are currently licensing, let's take the biggest field, Rosebank. We are paying for the development of that, and we are giving that Rosebank... We're giving Rosebank...
75% tax on it.
Most of that money, 3.5, something like 3.4 billion, we are paying for the development of that field. If we weren't doing that, that licence wouldn't have been granted. They wouldn't have taken that licence up.
Dr. Brown, can I just ask one interesting question? Because I've interviewed quite a few spokespeople from Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion and other groups, and I wonder, what's your position on nuclear power? Are you in favour of it or are you against it?
Some people have some views, some people have others, but the point about...
Look, can I just ask for your position?
My position is that it's going to take a long time to develop. And what we have, the period that we have this rapidly closing window in which we have to make massive changes.
Because the reason I
let me just finish the point.
Can I just finish the question, and then you can have the time to make the point? Because there are many people who campaign with your group who don't just campaign against new oil and gas. They also campaign against Sizewell C. They campaign against Hinkley Point. They campaign against clean forms of power that they don't like the look of politically. And if it is true that we're going to have this societal collapse, this big disaster, pension funds crashing down and storms and all the rest of it,
true.
Why would you be equivocal on a form of powerful, clean energy like nuclear power? Why wouldn't you be campaigning for that?
Well, look, that's because that's not Just Stop Oil's demand. We have a very simple demand, which makes sense, which is easily implementable, which will not damage our economy. It will result in the transfer of investment to things which... Look, the long-term position of the government, the net zero policy, is to import vast amounts of gas.
Well, this is what I want to
company.
come up with, because is it not the case that if we stop if we stop oil and gas here, exploration, OK, we can virtue signal on the international stage and feel good about ourselves and hope that other countries will follow our lead, but won't the reality just be that we import more gas, which is dirtier, from other countries?
Most of our gas is imported already, and our total oil and gas reserves are declining anyway. We're just topping them up. Now, the sooner we stop, the sooner we can move to a renewable infrastructure.
What about fertilisers, herbicides, all of these things that we use oil for? We use oil to create all sorts of things, not just to heat our homes and the like, and to fuel our engines.
Now, the position on what I would call an absolute zero position for oil and gas is that there will be a small residual sector which is difficult to decarbonise. And that's what we should be thinking about technologies to manage the offset, to manage the capturing of those resources. That's what we have to do. Can I just point out, though?
Yes, of course. We do have short on time, but go on.
OK. That GB News is owned by a man called Marshall, I think, who has almost £2 billion invested in oil and gas.
Can I just say that Paul Marshall is a very wealthy man with many investments, many
£2 billion is a lot of money
as well.
Many of us don't have investments in oil and gas through pensions.
Let's just round this up, because of course lots of wealthy people have lots of different investments. I've seen the Just Stop Oil Twitter account this weekend tweeting about Palestine, tweeting about Gaza. That doesn't sound to me like a campaign that is solely focused on the climate. Why are so many of your fellow spokespeople so obsessed with a conflict in the Middle East rather than simply just stopping oil?
Our heart goes out to the people in Israel and Palestine. Our heart goes out to them. And what we would like to see there, of course, is a ceasefire, which our government has not supported.
That doesn't sound like an oil or an environmental.
But look, well, let me go on to make the point. The point is that what we are going to see, if we release more and more fossil fuel emissions into the atmosphere, our temperature goes up, we have more storms, we have much hotter weather, we have withering heat, and in large parts of the world, we were seeing the agricultural lands die, and the consequence of that is you have conflict, and when you have conflict, you have war. That's what we're going to see. So the sort of thing we're seeing now in the Middle East, we will see everywhere. That's why it's so important you tell the truth.
I think it's a mistake to assume that anyone who is concerned about the environment and stopping oil and gas and all of that has to sign up to another list of political statements or carry the same political views. I think that may be a mistake when you're looking to push one political agenda. But thank you very much indeed. Dr. Graham Buss is a Just Stop Oil spokesman. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you.
Well, lots more coming up for you this afternoon. Not least, we're going to get a little moment, our thoughts of our Home and Security Editor on the latest of that Israel and Hamas war. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Good Afternoon Britain. Now, there are real fears that pro-Palestinian protests may turn increasingly violent in the days ahead.
Yes, it comes after a weekend of direct action and follows other protests which specifically targeted the offices of MPs who voted against calls for a ceasefire.
At the same time, negotiations to release some of the 240 hostages being held by the terror group Hamas in Gaza are said to be entering a critical phase. It's thought that up to 50 hostages could be released in return for perhaps a 5-day ceasefire.
Yes, so for the latest, our security editor Mark White joins us now. Mark, let's start with what's happening here in this country, the reaction to the ongoing conflict. We've seen MPs being targeted, those who voted against calls for a ceasefire in Gaza. How serious is this problem?
Well, I think there is some real concern here. We heard from Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, saying that actually people have crossed the line now, that they've gone from simply protesting to intimidation and threats. And we know that there have been a number of MPs who are reporting that they have had death threats. And others have had their addresses that have been posted online as well. And then over recent days, we had Jo Stevens, the Shadow Welsh Secretary, having her offices spray painted with the word murderer, posters up there as well that indicated that, as far as the protesters were concerned, that she had blood on her hands. And Rishanara Ali as well, her Bethnal Green offices were surrounded by protesters in recent days. So I think some real concern. You don't have to cast your mind too far back to know that MPs have in the past been subjected to intimidation, death threats, and of course, let's not forget David Amos and Joe Cox, two MPs that were murdered as well. So the threat is very real, and we know that this conflict has brought out a lot of tension, with that tension only rising as more and more images come out of Gaza showing the harm to the civilian population in that particular enclave.
Certainly, and Mark, it's right you mention images coming out of Gaza, because in the last 24 hours we've seen images from the Al-Shifa hospital which tend to back up the Israeli claims that perhaps Hamas have been operating out of that hospital, using it as some sort of base. We've seen video of hostages, one who appeared well, being brought in, dragged into that hospital by these terrorists.
Yeah, we've got some of those images we can show for our viewers on television now that shows one of the hostages being manhandled into the hospital, clearly right in front of medics, other staff in the hospital itself. Another on a stretcher there that's injured. Now, according to the Israelis, they say that these hostages were a Nepali national and a Thai national who were then taken on into Al-Shifa Hospital. And what the Israeli Defence Forces say is this really highlights how medical staff there who have said consistently they are unaware of Hamas terrorists working in and around that hospital complex. According to the IDF, there are some untruths in what are being uttered by those medics and those staff that work in the hospital. Combine that with the other information that the IDF have released just yesterday with a 55-metre-long tunnel that has been exposed in the grounds of Al-Shifa Hospital. That they've gone down into with their probes and their technology that's taken them right down into that tunnel and along the tunnel itself to what they found was a blast door with a hole through it for firing. They have not gone beyond that blast door because they're concerned about the potential for that being booby-trapped, but they will enter that at some point. And the Al-Shifa Hospital is a vast complex. It is Gaza's largest hospital complex. So it's going to take them an awful long time to properly search that hospital in all of its grounds. And that's why, of course, the Israeli military wanted the hospital evacuated of those medical staff and the patients. That, of course, has brought widespread condemnation for the way in which they say the military has targeted this hospital. But the IDF say, look, you know, it's being used as a command and control facility by Hamas. They have no choice but to go in there and deal with that. The alternative would be to leave this in place.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark White, our Home and Security Editor, bringing us the very latest on the ongoing conflict in Israel and Gaza. But coming up... Oh, sorry, did you have something to say?
What struck me the most about this is I've seen a map where the Al-Shifa Hospital actually is. In order to get from Israel to that hospital, you go past so many other hospitals. Why were these hostages brought to that hospital, that particular hospital, so deep into the Gaza Strip, walking past many other hospitals that they could have stopped at? It seems to suggest that this is a Hamas headquarters.
Yes, and there is talk of some kind of hostage deal being agreed imminently, so fingers crossed for that. Coming up in just one moment, you'll be hearing the thoughts of our panel on the stories of the day and what Britain's talking about. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News.
It's 1:33. I'm Sophia Wemsler in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has promised to cut taxes carefully and sustainably. Rishi Sunak says the government can move into the next phase of fixing the economy now that inflation has been halved. Speaking ahead of Wednesday's autumn statement, he identified 5 long-term goals, which include reducing debt, building sustainable energy, supporting business and delivering world-class education. The government's former chief scientific advisor has told the COVID inquiry he's not convinced there was effective operational response to limit the spread of the virus when the pandemic started. Sir Patrick Vallance also described the scale of test and trace facilities through Public England as inadequate and said the urgency of action across Whitehall wasn't as consistent or as reliable as it should have been.
Well, I think I'm right in saying that the Prime Minister at the time gave up science when he was 15. And I think he'd be the first to admit it wasn't his forte and that he did struggle with some of the concepts and we did need to repeat them often. Certainly when I left a meeting, I would usually be persuaded that we had got him to understand what it was we were trying to say. But as one of the extracts showed that you put up there, that 6 hours later he might not have remembered what was in that presentation. So
There are growing hopes that dozens of hostages held by Hamas in Gaza may soon be released. US, Israel and Qatari mediators say a deal is edging closer. More than 200 people were taken by Hamas on the 7th of October. So far, only 4 have been released. It comes after the Israeli military claimed Hamas hid and murdered hostages at Gaza's main hospital. Meanwhile, more than 24 premature babies evacuated from Al-Shifa Hospital have arrived in Egypt. Gaza's health ministry says a joint operation by the UN and Palestinian Red Crescent has made the move possible. The Hamas-run health ministry says an airstrike on the different hospitals has killed at least 12 people in the north of the territory. And you can get more on all those stories by visiting our website at gbnews.com.
For a valuable legacy your family can own, gold coins will always shine bright. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2473 and €1.1413. And the price of gold is £1,581.86 per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,476 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. I'm Emily Carver. This is Tom Hardwood. We're with you till 3 o'clock. Now, we've got lots of emails coming in, lots of reaction to our interview with the Just Stop Oil spokesperson who wasn't out in Whitehall today. He came to speak to us instead. He didn't join in.
Perhaps good thing he did, because all of his friends seem to be arrested this afternoon, I should say.
Well, this is the thing. I did ask him about all of these young people who are getting arrested and may find they have a criminal record for the rest of their lives. Is that a good duty of care from an organisation, or perhaps that doesn't matter to them? Yes, Roy says he's beginning to wonder what planet they live on. Only now he's wondering. Can somebody from Just Stop Oil explain how they travel to London, how they cook what they eat and drink, and where their clothes are manufactured? Well, this is the thing. So many things, besides heating our homes and fueling our cars, require fossil fuels. And if we don't make it here, we're going to have to import it from elsewhere.
Yes, and Caroline has written in to say, I'm sorry, but the male guest lost me on his argument about Gaza and Israel. It has nothing to do with new oil and gas licences. And I have to say, Caroline, I completely agree with you there. If you have a campaign that's called Just Stop Oil, just do that. Why are you talking about the Middle East? Why are you talking about Gaza? Why are you talking about hospitals?
Well, we saw Greta Thunberg she was giving a speech at a rally about, environmental issues, of course, Extinction Rebellion and whatnot, in Amsterdam. She had the mic ripped out of her hand because she started talking about Palestine.
Do you know the funniest thing about Greta Thunberg? She has been campaigning against a wind farm in Norway because it's on indigenous Norwegian native people's land, sort of these people who live a traditional lifestyle, and she thinks that indigenous rights trump climate rights in this instance. So
this is where you get in trouble.
It's not just campaigning against a new a potential wind farm. She wants an existing wind farm torn down.
This is the problem with social justice activism. There's always something, one cause that's more important than your initial cause, and then you're in a mess. Anyway, joining us now in the studio is former editor of the Sunday Express, Martin Townsend, and former Labour MP Bill Rammell. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Should we get your reaction to Just Stop Oil? You've been watching the footage in the green room, hopefully. What do you make of it?
I think Just Stop Oil alienate the very people that they need to be supporting them. I was saying earlier, about 9 months ago, I was going to Hounslow from Essex on the M25, and I was stuck there for 7 hours. Got out of the car, and people were absolutely seething. And I believe in tackling environmental problems, but you have to take people with you, and you don't do it with the kind of tactics we're seeing.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think one of the worst things they did was gluing themselves to a tube train a couple of years ago, which I just thought, hang on a minute, trains? I thought you were in favour of trains, and suddenly... And I was so pleased to see the commuters actually pull them off the top of the roofs of those. I mean, my problem with Just Stop Oil is, what do they want? I mean, we're there, aren't we? We're trying to get to net zero. There are all these different carbon... You know, this is all anyone talks about. What is it actually that Just Stop Oil want?
It's so peculiar that it's happening in the United Kingdom, which by any objective assessment has done more than any G7 country to reduce CO2 emissions. We've halved them since 1990, which is a far cry from most European countries that have reduced them by some degree, and a very far cry from countries like Canada, which actually have increased their CO2 emissions.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've always just felt that, you know, the future for energy is going to be a mixture of things anyway. I mean, I just don't think you can, like, put things, you know, just say, right, we'll get rid of that, we'll get rid of this. It's going to have to be a blend, a mixture. I mean, I think at some point people will decide that, you know, it's not electric energy, it's going to be hydrogen. It's, you know, so there's going to be a lot of those kind of debates going on, and I just find their particular, what seems to be a very narrow protest, utterly...
Bill, that's what annoys a lot of us. Sorry to interrupt. That's what annoys a lot of our viewers and listeners, and I must admit myself too, is that if you want to get on board with Just Stop Oil, or if you want to get on board with environmental concerns, you have to also sign up to being anti-capitalist. You have to have a view on Middle Eastern conflict. You have to have a view on God knows what else.
Well, I mean, we were saying earlier that an awful lot of the activists involved in Just Stop Oil are young, are upper middle class, and you get the sense they're getting their rebellion out of the system, and I think half of them will be voting Tory by the time they're 40. You know, it's not the way to go forward. To tackle environmental problems, you need to change the way we live, the way we work, the way we lead our lives, and to do that, you've got to take people with you, and you don't do that by massively disrupting everyone's lives.
No, if you look at I mean, one of the things there, I mean, the kind of going in and vandalising paintings of the National Gallery, I mean, as a child, I went to the National Gallery because it's free, right? You can go in, you can see the most beautiful works of art from all over the world. And then you've got these kids going in from God knows what middle-class family, you know, with all their kind of trust funds and everything else, throwing paint or powder or whatever all over these paintings. The National Gallery now, we learn at the weekend, are not going to be able to protect all of those galleries. I know this is a small thing. People go, oh, well, climate change is a bit more important than an Impressionist painting. To me, it isn't. To me, this is where they don't take people with them. This is just nonsense.
Martin, they're fed the idea, though, that probably the National Gallery and its paintings is elitist and
well, it isn't.
Product of colonialism and represents, you know, the horrors of Western civilization. So therefore, it's their duty to take it all down, or at least they don't care.
Shall we move on? Shall we segue very neatly from one form of protest to another, because we have seen increasing sort of threatening behaviour, particularly towards Labour MPs who don't toe the sort of Jeremy Corbyn line when it comes to Gaza. And Bill, I wonder what's your thoughts? What are your thoughts on this? Where is the line? Where do you draw the line between legitimate democratic participation, protest, and something that becomes rather more threatening?
Well, I think people do have the right to protest, but they have the right to do it peacefully. And some of the scenes we've seen over the weekend with people, you know, throwing things, attacking the offices of Labour MPs are unacceptable. Look, what's happening in Gaza, in the Middle East, is abominable. It's a humanitarian crisis, but it was started with 1,400 Israelis on October the 7th being killed. Put that into context. If that was the UK, that would be 12,000 British citizens. So, of course, Israel has a right to self-defence. It's got to adhere to international humanitarian law. But, you know, there has to be a way forward. And I'm actually encouraged in the last 24 hours with some of the noises coming out of Washington, coming out of Israel, that there might be a 5-day pause in the fighting to allow humanitarian aid and other supplies to go into Gaza. But a ceasefire is not the solution, because Hamas will remain in place.
The irony here, of course, is that had Israel not gone into Gaza, there wouldn't have been that negotiation. There wouldn't have been you wouldn't be able to say stop hostilities and we'll give back hostages. There'd be no leverage from the Israelis, I suppose, Martin.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I just would like to make a point about Labour, which is, I would say, where were the Labour Party when their own Jewish MPs were being attacked a few years ago under the Corbyn government by Momentum? Where were when, you know, bricks were being thrown through the windows of Jewish MPs, and we know the problems that Labour have had with anti-Semitism over the years. Where was the Labour reaction
We
there?
were a wholly different party that completely lost its way under Jeremy Corbyn, and Jeremy Corbyn rightly is no longer a Labour MP.
Well, people have very long memories, and I have a very long memory, and I would say this, is that Jewish people in this country have had to have their schools protected, their synagogues protected for years and years, decades, right? This is nothing new, and the Labour Party were not helpful all those years ago, far from it. It might be a previous government, but it was Corbyn's government, and nothing was done to protect Labour Jewish MPs at that
Listen
point.
to what the Jewish community are saying about how much they welcome the steps that Keir Starmer has taken to tackle anti-Semitism, to rid the party of anti-Semitism.
I mean, let's be honest. When it comes to the threatening of politicians, which we have seen over this issue, MPs are fearful of some kind of Islamist terror attack, some kind of Islamist Jew-hating attack, potentially on them, their family. Scary time to be an MP when something like this heats up. There is a very real threat, and we hear it from the security services, we hear it from the government, we hear it from Home Office, etc., etc. There is a very real threat, and I think that is what MPs are scared of.
And in the last few years, we've had 2 MPs murdered.
Exactly.
And that's very different from the time when I was a Member of Parliament. You know, the world has changed for the worse.
But I don't disagree with that. But I think at a time when you've got people in the streets, going on protests, openly supporting Hamas, openly, saying these hateful things about the Jewish community. I mean, what do you expect? I mean, this is not being dealt with by the government. It's just not.
Bill, I think it's really clear that the leadership of the Labour Party has changed on this issue. Clearly, Keir Starmer is a very different man to Jeremy Corbyn. But we did see 1/3 of his MPs go against what Sir Keir Starmer was saying with regard to how Gaza should be dealt with. We saw 1/3, we saw 10 shadow front benchers be forced out, forced to resign or be fired because of their views. Has the whole of the Labour Party changed, or is it just that bit at the top?
Well, they weren't speaking out in favour of anti-Semitism. They weren't speaking out in favour of Hamas. They've got genuine concerns about the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, and they have the right to take that view. I happen to believe that the alternative is more effective, that Keir is pursuing the right path. But what was noteworthy about that was that there was still respect on both sides of the argument. Very deeply held views, but respect for the other side. Compare and contrast with the divisions in the Tory party these days, when they're virtually at each other's throats and no level of respect whatsoever.
Do you think Keir Starmer was expecting some of his shadow front bench to depart from his point of view on this one?
Probably not, I wouldn't have thought, no. I mean, Keir Starmer has been the biggest control freak around the Labour Party. He's deselected people left, right and centre if they're too left-wing, etc., etc. He wants to be in control. So, he wouldn't have expected. He even thought he was across it.
Bit of a shock.
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. I mean, from the beginning of the conflict, it was very clear that there were very strong views, and I think Keir saw that coming. But he stuck to his guns. Has he
stuck to his guns? He's U-turned on the position of cutting off fuel and water. That was potentially a misstep from him.
OK, at the very beginning of the conflict, he gave an interview on LBC, I think it was, and he didn't quite represent his view effectively. He immediately put that right, and he's been...
It took him a few days.
OK, within a couple of days, but he's consistently made clear our support as a party for the State of Israel, their right to self-defence and complete opposition
to be fair,
to
he is in a very difficult position, having that many MPs and top MPs in his shadow cabinet disagreeing with his position so vehemently that they would resign or be open to a sack. Shall we...
I've got one more story that I want to just...
Go on, then. Why not?
It's something that we have teased a couple of times, and it might not seem particularly relevant, but I think it is interesting. We've got a video of a man wielding a chainsaw that I'd like to show everyone watching on television. We've got that coming up right now.
What on earth is this, Tom?
This is a man wielding a chainsaw, surrounded by supporters, a real chainsaw, and this man has just become president of Argentina. His name is Javier Milei, and he ran on a platform to abolish his own currency and replace it with the US dollar. He wants to abolish most government departments. He is a radical outsider. He calls himself a libertarian. There are some media who call him far right. There's been a quiet revolution in Argentina, a country that has a staggering... We think we've got high inflation in the UK. Their inflation is over 100%.
140, last time I checked.
Is this the next bout of the populist wave taking over the world, Martin?
Can we trust a man with a chainsaw? He's not even wearing protective goggles, I would say, at this point. He seems to have ignored every law of health and safety, though. He's waving it over someone's head. Yeah, he's a maverick. I mean... I don't know enough about Argentinian politics to answer, if I'm honest, but, honestly, that doesn't seem to me to be the face of responsible government. I could be wrong.
But he is a maverick. I was at a Foreign Affairs conference in Morocco at the weekend, and a fellow panellist was an Argentinian, and she was telling me it was neck and neck in the polls. Actually, he's won by 11%. So this is virtually, in a two-horse race, a landslide. And he's a Trump-style populist. And, these people have easy solutions to very difficult problems, and it will unravel, and I think it will be a disastrous end. And the point you make as well, inflation. So something you're paying £30 for today will cost you £75 this time next year. How on earth do you cope with that kind of situation?
Well, isn't that precisely why he's won? There's been an old he was running against the economy minister of the previous government. Now, this was the person who was presiding over 140% inflation. I suppose, should we be surprised that this has happened?
Yeah, although, I mean, Argentina has a history of instability, division, economic
this is
chaos.
him dressed up as a superhero earlier this year. The name of the superhero is Captain ANCAP. Now, that stands for anarcho-capitalist. I just felt like
it is quite extraordinary that someone has won on a ticket of dismantling various government departments. You do not see that in this country. And people compare him to Donald Trump. Well, Donald Trump never suggested such a thing.
No,
and if you compare him to Boris Johnson, Boris Johnson might like a bit of fancy dress every now and again, but he certainly wouldn't be calling for...
Having said that, when I saw his photograph this morning, he reminded me of the late, great Les Dawson. I'm sure he's very different.
Yeah. Well, goodness me, we are running to the end of this segment, but we will be back with much, much more in the next hour. So thank you very much, both to Martin Townsend and Bill Rammell, for talking through those issues.
Yes, still to come on today's show, Rishi Sunak reportedly faces cabinet opposition over his plans to salvage the Rwanda plan. Can the government solve their flagship policy? This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 2 o'clock on Monday, the 20th of November.
Taking to the streets. Just Stop Oil vow to protest every day from today until they win. Right now, many have been arrested in central London and will be there live again with the latest.
And Rwanda back on the rocks. The Prime Minister faces a cabinet revolt over plans to ignore the ECHR and salvage his migrants policy.
The battle for business. We'll be bringing you the very latest from the CBI conference as both the Tories and Labour compete to be crowned the party of business.
And with the Chancellor set to deliver his autumn statement on Wednesday, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has said he believes in cutting taxes, but wait for it, carefully and sustainably, Tom.
Yeah, what does that mean? It's so interesting. The government has had different positions behind the scenes. Is it going to be inheritance tax? Is it going to be income tax, national insurance? Personally, I think it's an absolute farce that national insurance and income tax are called different things. It's the same tax. It goes into the same pot. They should just merge them.
Yeah, should they be merged?
Of course
that would
they
be more
should.
sensible,
it's just
wouldn't
semantics.
It? Yeah, just semantics.
And it makes people feel like they pay less tax, but it's a lie. The government, in effect, lies to you because it says your income tax rate is, whatever percent it is, but it's actually that plus the national insurance rate. So, I mean, it's the same tax.
I filled in one of these online tests the other day where it gives you it makes you Chancellor and you decide what you'd prioritise in terms of tax cuts.
I bet you
and
enjoyed
things.
that.
Yes. I didn't put inheritance tax, though.
No.
I put things like national insurance, cutting that, or at least...
Well, abolishing national insurance, it makes people think that there is a pot, for example, a pension pot that they've been paying into, when it's a lie, it's a Ponzi scheme. And politicians have been lying to the people of this country for decades, pretending the money that people have been paying in has been saved for them, when it has actually been spent there and then. And we need to raise new taxes to pay for expenditure like pensions.
Yes, but someone's going to have to pay for your pension too, Tom.
Yeah, well, that's the point I'm making.
So it's something that we do for past generations and ongoing.
Well, perhaps what should have happened is that it should have gone into a pot and should have accumulated interest and then could have been paid for as people think that they've paid for it themselves.
Do we trust our government to invest our money wisely?
That's a very good point.
Inheritance, will they be making any gains? I very much doubt it. It could be eaten by inflation anyway, the way things are going, although that is down. Anyway, we'll be discussing all of that plus much more after your headlines with Sophia.
Good afternoon, it's 2 minutes past 2. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has promised to cut taxes carefully and sustainably. Rishi Sunak says the government can move into the next phase of fixing the economy now that inflation has been halved. Speaking ahead of Wednesday's autumn statement, he identified 5 long-term goals, which include reducing debt, building sustainable energy, supporting business and delivering world-class education.
So now that inflation is halved and our growth is stronger, meaning revenues are higher, we can begin the next phase and turn our attention to cutting tax. We will do this in a serious, responsible way, based on fiscal rules to deliver sound money and alongside the independent forecasts of the Office of Budget Responsibility. And we can't do everything all at once. It will take discipline, and we need to prioritise. But over time, we can and we will cut taxes.
The COVID inquiry has been told the government's response to the pandemic was inadequate. Former Chief Scientific Advisor Sir Patrick Vallance says he's not convinced there was an effective operational response to limit the spread of the virus when the pandemic started. He described the scale of test and trace facilities through Public England as inadequate and said the urgency of action across Whitehall wasn't as consistent or as reliable as it should have been. Sir Patrick was also asked whether Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister at the time, was bamboozled by the science.
Well, I think I'm right in saying that the Prime Minister at the time gave up science when he was 15. And I think he'd be the first to admit it wasn't his forte, and that he did struggle with some of the concepts, and we did need to repeat them often. Certainly when I left a meeting, I would usually be persuaded that we had got him to understand what it was we were trying to say. But as one of the extracts showed that you put up there, that 6 hours later he might not have remembered what was in that presentation.
There are growing hopes that dozens of hostages held by Hamas in Gaza may soon be released. US, Israel and Qatari mediators say a deal is edging closer. More than 200 people were taken by Hamas on the 7th of October. So far, only 4 have been released. It comes after the Israeli military claimed Hamas hid and murdered hostages at Gaza's main hospital. Video has been released of what the IDF says are hostages being kept in Al-Shifa hospital. Meanwhile, more than 24 premature babies evacuated from Al-Shifa have arrived in Egypt. Gaza's health ministry says a joint operation by the UN and Palestinian Red Crescent has made the move possible. The Hamas-run ministry also says an airstrike on different hospitals has killed at least 12 people in the north of the territory. A man has been arrested on suspicion of murder following the death of a woman in Dewsbury. Officers were called to a property in the Ravensthorpe area last night. West Yorkshire Police says a woman in her 20s was found seriously injured and she died a short time later. Ofsted is not fit for purpose, according to an inquiry. The Beyond Ofsted inquiry called for transformational change and said it found Ofsted as having a detrimental impact on schools, which some perceive as toxic. The inquiry, chaired by former Schools Minister Lord Jim Knight and sponsored by the National Education Union, recommends the school inspection system should be overhauled. And a pool player who bought a table after winning the lottery has won a bronze medal at the European Championship. Neil Jones had just £13 in his pocket when he and his partner won £2.4 million just before Christmas in 2010. One of his first purchases was a pool table, with the 59-year-old honing his skills and going on to represent England. Mr. Jones spoke of the honour of representing his country and winning bronze at the European Black Ball Championships in Malta. This is GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on your digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Tom and Emily.
Welcome back. Now, Just Stop Oil are taking to the streets today, with environmental group vowing to march every day from this point until, quote, it wins.
The campaign, which will last 7 days until the 26th of November, demands that the government stop all new licences for oil and gas contracts.
Well, let's get the very latest now with GB News reporter Ray Addison, our man in Westminster. And Ray, there were quite a few arrests going on when we caught up with you earlier. What's happened since?
Yeah, well, the Met Police have revealed that they actually arrested 15 Just Stop Oil protesters. Of course, their stated aim was to make it all the way from Trafalgar Square to here, the Houses of Parliament, and to continue their protest on the road. Now, speaking to me before they started that protest, they admitted they didn't think they would get very far because, of course, the police have these more robust powers now to make those arrests. They use Section 7 of the Public Order Act, and that's what they used today. They stated very clearly to those 50 or so protesters that when they began that protest, they would be arrested in no short measure, and that's exactly what happened. Now, what you get with Just Stop Oil, of course, you get the protesters and you get the supporters. So although there was 50 or so there that I saw, ultimately only 15 ended up putting themselves in a position in the road where they ended up being arrested by the Met Police. The rest were supporters. It can be a bit strange sometimes
as well, because I've been to protests where they have their own supporters walking alongside, clapping and saying thank you to their colleagues, so to speak, Just Stop Oil activists. And it can be a little bit strange. Meanwhile, you have a lot of drivers going past, some slowing down, stopping and shouting, get a job or get out of the road, and so on and so forth. Of course, it started, as I said, at Trafalgar Square. They made it about 100 metres. The last few stragglers made it about 100 metres down Whitehall. And then, of course, when they were arrested, we saw that huge swathe of police officers move in, about 50 or 60 officers, and the sergeant yelling at them, let's get them lifted and shifted. And that's exactly what they did. As I said, it was a bit of a strange circus almost. We had a YouTuber who was sort of pretending to be a protester, but really sort of protesting their protest, and somebody with a shopping trolley, a United Nations flag playing Michael Jackson's Heal the World. In the meantime, of course, there's 6 more days of action and lots of opportunities for protest. We know that South Korea's president is going to be meeting with King Charles tomorrow, and of course we have Budget Day on Wednesday as well, so plenty of opportunities to disrupt the roads and get in the way.
Ray, you called it a circus there. I mean, you plonked yourself right in the middle of it, in Whitehall, in the middle of the road between 2 bus lanes. It got a bit sketchy for you out there, but was it a bit of a damp squib then? So we've had 15 activists arrested, not too much of a turnout. Do you imagine it will ramp up into the weekend when more people are free to march to their heart's content?
Well, if I put my comms head on for a minute, if I imagine I was Just Stop Oil's press team, I would imagine, I don't think that's ever going to happen, but if it ever were to happen, I would imagine that I would have wanted to see larger numbers than that. We know that only recently there was a protest on another part of London where there was about 114 protesters and 114 arrests. And so to start this huge sort of 7 days of mass disruption, billing it, you've never seen disruption like this before, and to only then have the 50 protesters that I counted turn up and only then 15 arrests, maybe this is part of the plan. Maybe they want it to grow and grow, and maybe by Sunday afternoon we're going to see huge numbers. Who knows?
Maybe we will, or maybe it will be a little bit less populous, perhaps. Let's see. Thank you very much indeed, GB News reporter Ray Addison, bringing us the very latest from that Just Stop Oil protest.
It is interesting. If this were to happen before the latest version of the Public Order Act, the police would have had many fewer powers with which to deal with these protesters. And it could have been the case that just 15 people, which doesn't represent a particularly large slice of the British population, that just 15 people could have brought Westminster to a standstill. I mean, I suppose this sort of points to the laws that have been passed being perhaps for the common good.
Yeah. Potentially. Of course, the police have been accused of all sorts, not least two-tier policing when it comes to protests. They're clearly showing here that they do have the powers to stop people disrupting the roads when they wish to. Now, this is a fast-moving show, so we're moving on to Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, who has not ruled out cutting income tax in Wednesday's autumn statement. He insists economic growth is his priority. Does that mean that we're going to have a cut to income tax?
Who knows? It's a fast-moving situation. Of course, Jeremy Hunt also is said to be finalising the government's spending plans as he seeks to revive a stagnant British economy. Well, let's cross now to GB News political editor Christopher Hope. And Christopher, we heard from the Chancellor yesterday. We've heard from the Prime Minister today. It really does seem like things are moving on tax cuts.
Finally, Tom and Emily, that's right. It looks like they are moving towards doing some tax cuts on Wednesday. There's no way that the Prime Minister today in a college in North London, he said very clearly that the government, I want to cut tax, I believe in cutting tax. Now that is clearly what we call in our trade pitch rolling for some big announcement in 48 hours time. What will that be? Well, the IFS, Institute for Fiscal Studies, said there's opportunity to save maybe a few low numbers of billions by cutting taxes, but it may be indicating income tax cuts, national wants tax cuts for GB News viewers and everyone else after the March budget, or after in the new tax year. There could be some measures on full expensing, allowing companies to charge to offset their tax bill against expenses. There could be something on VAT. We're not sure, but we are seeing a shift in the ground in Westminster today, with the government going more on the front foot, led by Rishi Sunak, on the idea of cutting taxes. The idea of that, of course, is politically is to persuade those 20% of voters who are yet to declare or decide what they want to do at the next election to come back towards the Tory party and try and eat into that Labour lead.
Fascinating that things have moved this quickly. I suppose the narrative that Rishi Sunak wants to build up is that because inflation is down, he is now able to cut taxes. But I suppose that ignores the reality that inflation is still above 4%. That's twice the level, more than twice the level, that is the target of the Bank of England. Is there an argument that if you're to take Rishi Sunak's original argument, that inflation must be lower before cutting taxes, that he's going too soon?
Yes, but nothing else is working for him, is it, Tom, at the moment? He said he would halve inflation this year. He's done that. But the other targets he set himself may just be hit or may well not be hit. There's 5 targets governing areas like cutting debt, growing the economy, dealing with the NHS waiting list, and crucially stopping the boats. Maybe there might be some anemic growth, but that's about it. So I think he's trying to find something to hang on to. He's got to do something, because lots of Tory MPs are working out their futures for themselves. We hear today James Duddridge, a former ally of Boris Johnson. He's leaving Parliament in the next election. I think he feels he's done his time now, but there's lots of MPs here who I know worried about their futures, worrying why the government can't do more in power to try and help them win that next election. But he also did set out 5 long-term decisions for the government they're going to take over: reducing debt, cutting tax, as I say, building sustainable energy, backing British business, and delivering a world-class education. We know bits of that. The A-level reforms over 10 years were unveiled, for example, at the party conference in the beginning of last month. But in a sense, we are now seeing the effort behind driving division with Labour are happening ahead of what will be the election, probably in about a year's time.
Stay with us, Chris, because we want to bring in also to this conversation our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan. Liam, listening to what Chris was saying on the politics of it, how much fiscal room is there in the economic side of things to actually make many moves with regard to tax cuts?
Well, what we call fiscal headroom, Tom, the amount of scope the Chancellor's got to spend money or cut taxes, the amount of spare money, if you like, in the kitty, it really depends who you speak to, because those estimates rely in turn on estimates of where the economy is going to be in a year's time, how much growth there's going to be, how much tax revenue we'll raise. And if you listen to the likes of the official fiscal watchdog, the Office for Budget Responsibility, there's maybe £5 or £10 billion of fiscal headroom. If you go to the independent National Institute of Economic and Social Research, a very august body, they think the OBR is far too pessimistic. They're looking at 60 or 70 billion pounds of fiscal headroom, which would be enough for very sizable tax cuts. But look, what we've seen in the last 24, 48, 72 hours over the weekend, lots of speculation in the papers, we've seen what we call in our trade, Tom, a reverse ferret. We've seen the government, the Prime Minister and the Chancellor go from, there's no way we can possibly lower taxes, that would be deeply irresponsible, to, oh, now is the time to cut taxes and get growth going, and that's the responsible thing to do. You see what I did there with the language? And what kind of tax cuts could we see? Here's a quick menu, a little kind of smorgasbord, if you like, of the possible tax cuts that are in the ether, that are knocking about in newspaper columns, that people are talking about out of both sides of their mouth, if you like. Extend full expensing. What does that mean? It sounds a bit complicated. Well, full expensing is when a company makes an investment and then the cost of that investment can be offset against their corporation tax. This only really is useful for big companies that can afford to invest lots of money, you've got money spare. Another option to cut taxes may be to slash inheritance tax, a much-hasted tax. Some people would say maybe that is a bit too focused on better-off families. Only 4% of families pay inheritance tax. but it is much hated, so maybe you could cut the rate from 40 to 30% or raise the threshold from £325,000. You could raise that. But that wouldn't go down very well among less well-off voters who won't pay inheritance tax. Another idea is to raise frozen tax thresholds. What does that mean? Well, Chancellor Rishi Sunak, when he was Chancellor, before he became Prime Minister, he froze the thresholds that you start paying the basic rate of income tax, the higher rate of income tax, the additional rate of income tax. And because they've been frozen, but we've had inflation, more and more people have been dragged into those tax brackets, and that's a stealth tax, and people don't like that. So they could unfreeze those frozen tax thresholds, which are going to be frozen until 2028 on current policy. And finally, something that I've been promoting in my Sunday Telegraph columns, increase the personal tax allowance from £12,570. What does that mean? That's the level at which you start paying income tax. If you earn less than 12.5 grand, you don't pay income tax. If you earn more than 12.5 grand, you do start paying income tax. 12.5 grand is about a third of the average wage. So people like me have been saying, just raise that threshold to £20,000, take millions of low-income workers out of tax. That means you don't have to pay them in-work benefits. It's less hassle. They keep more of their money when they go from benefits into work. It will end a lot of the economic inactivity we've had, people not going back to work since COVID, leading to labour shortages.
Liam,
they're the four main tax ideas that are knocking around, Emily.
In terms of bringing people out of tax altogether, could there be a bit of a moral hazard there? If you pay tax, you're contributing to society, you have a stake in society, you're contributing to public services and things. Should we worry at all about bringing too many people out of tax entirely, or am I talking nonsense there?
You've got a point, but I'd say that sort of philosophical, if I may say so, aversion is offset by the practicalities of when people pay lots of tax from 12.5 grand, a very low wage. A lot of them just don't bother going to work at all. We'd much rather people were at work, paying tax, out and about, circulating. That means fewer social problems. That means we're less likely to be paying them what we call in-work benefits, which millions of people are now receiving. So, look, this is a cross-party idea. A lot of economists, left and right, want that personal tax allowance raised. I personally think the country needs a bold move to jumpstart the economy. We've been in lockdown. We've had a cost of living crisis. Let's do something bold. Let's raise the personal tax allowance to £20,000 and revolutionise, in my view, the world of work.
Well, Liam, it's a fascinating idea, one that would appease both the right of the Tory party who are calling for tax cuts, but also potentially many people who are critics of the government saying they're not doing enough for people on low incomes.
Also, let's remember there seems to be a political consensus at the moment across the board, Labour and the Conservatives, that the tax burden is too high.
That's
so
true.
What will the Labour Party have to say? They'll have something to say if inheritance tax is cut, but not the personal allowance. They'd be happy with that.
Yeah, they might even vote for it. Well, Liam, thank you so much for bringing us the very latest. We know that the Chancellor will be speaking in the next hour as well. Might he hint more? Well, we'll keep an eye on that.
It'd be nice if they told us something straight, but we'll hear on Wednesday. In any case, in just a moment, we'll be getting the latest update on the situation in Israel as fighting continues in the Gaza Strip. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't
hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Good Afternoon Britain. Now, there are real fears that pro-Palestinian protests may turn increasingly violent in the days ahead.
This comes after a weekend of direct action and follows other protests which specifically targeted the offices of MPs who voted against calls for a ceasefire in Gaza.
And at the same time, negotiations to release some of the 240 hostages being held by Hamas in Gaza are said to be entering a critical phase. It's thought that up to 50 hostages could be released in return for a 5-day humanitarian pause.
Yes, so for the latest, our security editor Mark White joins us now. Mark, lots of concerns have been raised over how the protests may become increasingly violent. We've seen intimidation of politicians. Where are we with that? How concerned should we be?
Yeah, we've also seen, let's not forget, violence in the actual protests as well. A minority of those who are marching, but still a concern. And yet Rachel Reeves, who's the Shadow Chancellor, has said actually that some of these protesters have crossed the line from protesting to intimidation. This is Joe Stevens' office in Cardiff. The Welsh Secretary, Shadow Welsh Secretary, daubed with spray paint saying murderer, posters put up there as well, accusing her of having blood on her hands. Another Labour MP, Rishinara Ali, had her offices picketed in Bethnal Green with a number of protesters. And there are reports from quite a number of MPs now that they have had death threats coming through from protesters, as well as home addresses for some MPs being posted online. So some real concern, I think, going forward about the potential, as we see more and more of the images coming out of Gaza, of the impact this is having on the civilian population.
Yes, and we've seen lists of those MPs who chose not to vote for the amendment on a ceasefire in Gaza, who chose not to back that. We've seen lists being published online. Some might say that's just democracy in action. Others might say it's encouraging intimidation of our politicians. Difficult line to draw. But of course, MPs will be very wary of potential Islamist threat.
Yeah, so we don't have to cast our minds too far back to see that MPs have come under some serious harm in the past. Of course, with the murders of Joe Cox and David Amos as well. And I think publishing lists of MPs who voted one way or another is fine, but it's when these MPs' home addresses are also being published that there is real concern.
Mark, let's zoom out a little bit and look at the instigating action of all of these protests, what's going on in Israel and Gaza, because, of course, we've seen new footage in the last 24 hours uncovering CCTV recording of hostages being taken to the Al-Shifa hospital.
The Israeli military have claimed for some time that the Al-Shifa hospital is being used by Hamas, that they have command and control structures underneath the hospital itself. And these CCTV images, which for our viewers in television they can see, for radio describe someone, a hostage, according to the IDF, being bundled into that hospital, another on a stretcher also being taken into the hospital as that other person is being bundled through the doors. And according to the IDF, this is in full view of medical staff. You can see medical staff in their scrubs there watching these people coming in. And of course, we know that medical staff have claimed for many a long month that they have no knowledge whatsoever of Hamas operating in and around the hospital. Well, as well as those hostages being brought in, as showed on the hospital's own security cameras, there are the tunnel systems that are now beginning to be unearthed. One tunnel with which is more than 55 metres in length, according to the IDF, has been unearthed. They sent a probe down into that tunnel as well, which went down the shaft 20 odd metres and then into the tunnel system itself until it came up against a blast door. And at that point, they didn't go any further because of the concerns about there being booby traps. But at some point going forward, they will try to unearth more of the tunnel systems. Remember, the Al-Shifa hospital is a vast complex, so they've got a lot of searching to do before they fully unearth all that may lie underneath this hospital. And in terms of the wider issue about hostages as well, yet another report coming out about negotiations that may be nearing fruition in terms of a number of hostages, perhaps up to 50 being released. But remember, you know, we've been here on multiple occasions. We've heard these stories coming from Hamas and coming from Qatar, who've been acting as brokers on behalf of Hamas. There was a news conference today in London with some family members of those being held hostage, and they spoke of their anguish at the many false dawns that have emerged about hostages being released.
Every story you bring with another deal here for releasing hostages, and another deal there, 50 here, 80 there, 15, 12. There are lots of numbers all everywhere. All this publishing is stabbing our stomachs again.
If you all have families and kids, just imagine one day one of them's gone. Just gone. You don't know where she is. You don't know what suffering she's going, whether she's been fed, watered, but not only that, just the sheer terror of a 9-year-old girl down in those dark tunnels, never seeing the light of day.
It's deeply distressing to listen to the anguish that those family members are going through. Around 240 hostages still being held. I say around 240 hostages because they think actually there's more than that. There are other missing people that they still haven't been able to account for at this stage, but they don't have any definite proof that they're being held by Hamas.
I heard Thomas Hand speaking yesterday at an anti-Semitism vigil outside Whitehall, yesterday outside Downing Street, and it was incredibly moving. 9-year-old daughter, Emily, who just had her birthday. Really, really devastating and moving stuff. Let's hope This deal does come to fruition and the hostages are freed. Thank you very much for your time, Mark White, our Home and Security Editor there, bringing us the very latest.
Yeah, really, really moving pictures there. But lots more coming up for you on today's show. You'll shortly be hearing the thoughts of our panel, the former editor of the Sunday Express, Martin Townsend, and former Labour MP Bill Rammell, on the stories that are happening right across the United Kingdom.
You don't want to miss it. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News.
It's 2:33. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has promised to cut taxes carefully and sustainably. Rishi Sunak says the government can move into the next phase of fixing the economy now that inflation has been halved. Speaking ahead of Wednesday's autumn statement, he identified 5 long-term goals, which include reducing debt, building sustainable energy, supporting business and delivering world-class education. The government's former chief scientific advisor has told the COVID inquiry he's not convinced there was effective operational response to limit the spread of the virus when the pandemic started. Sir Patrick Vallance also described the scale of test and trace facilities through Public England as inadequate and said the urgency of action across Whitehall wasn't as consistent or as reliable as it should have been. There are growing hopes that dozens of hostages held by Hamas in Gaza may soon be released. US, Israel and Qatari mediators say a deal is edging closer. More than 200 people were taken by Hamas on the 7th of October. So far, only 4 have been released. It comes after the Israeli military claimed Hamas hid and murdered hostages at Gaza's main hospital. Meanwhile, more than 24 premature babies evacuated from Al-Shifa Hospital have arrived in Egypt. Gaza's health ministry says a joint operation by the UN and Palestinian Red Crescent has made the move possible. The Hamas-run ministry says an airstrike on different hospitals has killed at least 12 people in the north of the territory. And you can get more on all those stories by visiting our website at gbnews.com.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist. And you survived? I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like? I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three. Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new
It's
teeth.
your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Great Britain. And
Welcome
Northern
back.
Ireland.
Straight to the Lords now, where Lord Cameron of Chipping Norton is being introduced to the United Kingdom's upper house. Let's listen in.
All lords spiritual and temporal, and all other our subjects whatsoever, to whom these presents shall come, greeting. Know ye that we of our especial grace, certain knowledge and mere motion, in pursuance of the Life Peerages Act 1958, and of all other powers in that behalf us enabling, do by these presents advance, create and prefer our right trusty and well-beloved councillor, David William Donald Cameron, to the state, degree, style, dignity, title and honour of Baron Cameron of Chipping Norton in our county of Oxfordshire. And for us, our heirs and successors, do appoint, give and grant unto him the said name, state, degree, style, dignity, title and honour of Baron Cameron of Chipping Norton, to have and to hold unto him for his life. Willing, and by these presents granting, for us, our heirs and successors, that he may have, hold and possess a seat, place and voice in the parliaments and public assemblies and councils of us, our heirs and successors, within our United Kingdom amongst the barons. And also that he may enjoy and use all the rights, privileges, preeminences, immunities and advantages to the degree of a baron duly and of right belonging, which barons of our United Kingdom have heretofore used and enjoyed, or as they do at present use and enjoy. In witness whereof, we have caused these our letters to be made patent. Witness ourself at Westminster, the 17th day of November, in the 2nd year of our reign. By warrant, under the King's sign manual.
I, David, Lord Cameron of Chipping Norton, do swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God.
And there we have it, Lord Cameron of Chipping Norton, the first Prime Minister to enter the Lords since Margaret Thatcher in 1992, swearing in there and wearing ermine in a picture that no doubt will delight his political opponents, always criticised as someone who came from a rather well-to-do background and potentially leaning into that caricature in his ermine this afternoon.
I mean, it's been quite the 7 days for now Lord Cameron of Chipping Norton, Foreign Secretary, now formally joined the House of Lords. He's been to Ukraine as well for a visit. It's been a busy 7 days for Cameron. Should we get the views of our panel?
Let's do that indeed, because I understand that Lord Cameron will now be addressing the House of Lords for the first time later this afternoon, and then addressing the 1922 committee of Conservative backbench MPs as well. It's remarkable to see him back in public life. Martin.
Yeah, remarkable and slightly terrifying in my view, actually, and rather desperate in my view as well. I don't quite understand why you would bring David Cameron back, frankly. I think looking at that, I think I can imagine a lot of ordinary people, not just Tory voters, will look at that and go, really? David Cameron in Ermine in the House of Lords, the whole...
Explain why. What is it that you think is... he shouldn't be there. Why shouldn't he be there?
Well, first of all, there's been a narrative over the weekend that by bringing David Cameron back, they're bringing grown-ups back into government. I've honestly never seen David Cameron in that way. I think he's a really nice guy, very pleasant and everything, but I never rated him when he was Prime Minister. And I think when push comes to shove and a job really needs to be done, I just don't think he's terribly good at it.
Do you not think that the weight of a former Prime Minister of the UK for 6 years, knows a lot of people on the international stage, having someone like that walk into a room carries more weight than someone else? Isn't that a good thing for British foreign policy?
It may well be if he can deliver, but my experience of David Cameron is that if you take, for instance, the Brexit campaign, I was a Brexiteer, so I was delighted by the fact that he made such a complete hash of presenting the Remain case, because I think he completely screwed that up. And that was supposed to be so important to him. All he did was insult members of UKIP by calling them swivel-eyed loons and not really lean into the fact that the EU had done an awful lot for Britain. I'd say this even as a Brexiteer. And he could have made far more of that argument, and he didn't.
He let down a lot of people by abandoning his role when, arguably, we needed him the most. Bill Rammell, is your view quite as damning of now Lord Cameron?
It's fairly damning of David Cameron. I'm an ardent Remainer and actually think he was a chancer in taking an enormous risk with the country's future, and he didn't lead the Remain campaign in any way, shape or form. I think the other risk is if you're a really, really strong and credible Prime Minister, then bringing a former Prime Minister back isn't a problem. But if you're a weak and vacillating Prime Minister, as I think Rishi Sunak increasingly demonstrates he is, I think there are real risks. And I think what it reveals is the zigzagging of Tory policy. So firstly, after the calamitous reign of Liz Truss, Rishi was the stability guy. He then pitched to the right. He's now apparently pitching to the centre. And, I think behind that may be a recognition that he's going to lose the general election. He's lost the red wall. Cameron might give him some help in retaining the blue wall. But it's all over the place.
I think Rishi Sunak wants to fix his personal... what's the word? Reputation. I don't think he wants to be seen as a right-wing politician.
I think it's really interesting. We've got a Remainer and a Brexiteer here who both think that David Cameron, who both have poor views of David Cameron, and I think this is the Theresa May trap, isn't it? If you're someone who upsets the Remainers perhaps by calling a referendum in the first place and then upsets the Brexiteers by campaigning in the other way, you've left two halves of the country with nothing to like about you. But let's pause this conversation for now, because it's not just David Cameron who is out and about today, but the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Jeremy Hunt, will be speaking at the annual CBI conference, the Confederation of British Industry. So let's join John Foster, the Chief Policy Officer for the CBI now. And John, what would you like to hear from the Chancellor this afternoon?
So, look, obviously, you're just speaking about stability, which has been so critical. And I think what we would say is the Chancellor and the government deserves credit for using the last two fiscal events to provide some stability. Ask any business leader and they'll tell you stability is the precondition for growth. But the next stage, and what the Prime Minister alluded to in his speech earlier this morning, is the need to inject a bit of momentum into the economy. And that's what we're hoping the Chancellor will talk a little bit more about this afternoon, but also on Wednesday with the autumn statement.
Convinced are you with the government strategy? We've heard so many different rumours about all sorts of different tax cuts. Do you believe there is space in the economy for some big giveaways, if we want to use that terminology?
Well, look, I guess it depends what the Chancellor delivers on Wednesday. The only thing I would say is we need to be really careful that a tax cut today doesn't lead to a tax rise tomorrow. So whatever he comes up with on Wednesday needs to be part of a plan for how we deliver sustainable growth. Now, for our money, the best way that you can really do that is by boosting business investment, which is why we've been campaigning for the Chancellor to use the autumn statement to deliver full expensing. We think that's the most transformational thing that he can do to really provide that momentum into the economy right now.
When a business invests, whether it be in machinery or technology, it can write off that investment against its tax bill. It can have lower taxes if it invests in Britain.
That's exactly right. It's about encouraging businesses to invest. Look, what we know is that right now, the only growth that we're going to get is going to come almost exclusively from the private sector. The government doesn't have a lot of headroom for extra public investment. Consumer demand is obviously soft because of monetary policy and the Bank of England rate rises working their way through. So we have to do everything we can to encourage business investment. It's also about as close to a silver bullet as we've got for tackling the UK's productivity problem. So you're exactly right. Measures to boost business investment, encourage business to invest. That's what we want to see on Wednesday.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your time. John Foster there, Chief Policy Officer at the Confederation of British Industry, a.k.a. the CBI. Should we bring back our panel into the conversation? The autumn statement, Martin. Actually, I'll start with Bill, sorry. I'll start with Bill because as former Labour MP, I think there's a bit of a consensus between the Conservatives and the Labour Party in terms of feeling like the tax burden is far too high. The Labour Party haven't really indicated that they have specific taxes that they wish to cut. I don't think yet. They've said they want to hold back before they make any big announcements because they haven't seen the accounts properly. Who do you expect? Do you expect the Conservatives to bring down the tax burden this side of an election?
I'm not sure because there's been so many contradictory briefings. Certainly, I think in the medium term, taxes do need to come down because, you know, under the Conservatives, we've got the highest tax burden, I think, since the Second World War. So that needs to be tackled. But, you know, after the experience of Liz Truss with unfunded tax cuts that hit all of us with higher mortgage costs, the economy tanking, I think the Conservatives need to be very careful. And I'm not convinced that there's fiscal headroom there to bring in tax cuts. And some of the things that have been bandied about a cut to inheritance tax that would only benefit the 3% wealthiest families in the country would be a disastrous move. Actually, if there is money to spare, I actually think investment in public services, because the impact of inflation on schools, on hospitals, on public transport and much more has been really severe. And, you know, our infrastructure is crumbling.
People hate inheritance tax, though, even if they won't actually end up paying it. There's a sense of injustice around it, a death tax after you've lived your whole life.
Well, the sense of injustice is because it is unjust. And I think it affects way more than just the rich. I think it's a way of getting the property market moving. I would say also the same with getting rid of stamp duty. Let's get the market moving again. I don't think that it's a thing to do this time round. And I kind of agree with Bill that, I mean, it's down to the Chancellor's judgment. This is a man, if we're talking about David Cameron, been in politics for a few years, Jeremy Hunt's been in politics for a few years too, he's run businesses, etc., etc. If he thinks there's money that he can use, then I would be in favour of what we've just heard, which is, you know, to try and use that money to encourage small traders, startups, you know, get investment moving again, let's get some momentum going. But my view is, I think if he looks, I don't think the money's there, and I think that it's more important. I think the most important thing at the moment is for the Tories to restore or try and restore their kind of their reputation for financial competency and do the right thing.
Well,
so if there's no money, don't try and spend it.
Moving something wider than the autumn statement. Yeah. There's a story in the news today about Simon Cowell giving up working on Fridays. Is this indicative of our economy more widely?
Well, I used to do a lot of work in the music business at one time, and a lot of people in the music business didn't work on a Friday. But I can tell you something, I bet Simon Cowell did, because Simon Cowell did very well in the music business. My view of this is, you know, it's kind of, Fridays are like any other day. It's 5 days a week. If you go to work for 5 days a week, you should go to work for 5 days a week. I work on a Friday, and actually I get a lot done on a Friday. Why? Because so many people are away that the phone rings a lot less and I can actually crack on with things often. I think this is crazy, saying, you know, 4-day weeks and 3-day weeks.
Can I just say what he told The Sun?
Sure.
It makes me laugh. He says... yeah, so he's advised people not to work on Friday because the 5-day week is pointless, in his view. He says, he told The Sun, actually, the first thing is take off Fridays, don't work on Fridays because you don't have to. Eat dinner at 5 o'clock, don't take calls after 5:30, don't read emails after 5:30, watch a happy movie and stay outside. It's unrealistic for some. This is the sort of civil servant style of working.
Well, I think it feeds in as well to the kind of changes that have happened since COVID, with people working from home, people working less. And I think there's a long-term consequence, you know, because it hits productivity and you don't get anything in life without working hard. And I think, certainly for someone like Simon Cowell, I think it sends out the wrong message.
I think in the past, when he was still grafting, he probably would have worked every Friday
Absolutely.
he had to get it up.
So right now he's a multi-millionaire. He can sort of lean back, but perhaps there's a wider lesson, because it does seem to me that more businesses are saying, actually, we need people in the office more often, that we've perhaps seen peak working from home been and gone.
And you lose so much by people constantly be working from home. You lose that connectivity, the bouncing of ideas off of each other that you simply don't get through a screen. Having said that, I'm very conscious that for young people, they've bought into working from home significantly. So I think there needs to be some compromise. But I think a minimum 3 days a week in the office.
I think that's a good idea. Well, thank you very much indeed for joining us, our wonderful panellists, former editor of the Sunday Express, Martin Townsend, and former Labour MP, Bill Rammell. Thank you for your time.
Well, coming up next is Martin Dornby, who magically appears on the sofa next to us now. Martin, what's coming up on your show?
First of all, fantastic show. Good afternoon, Britain. Punchy, pacey, and a great chemistry. Well done.
Thank you.
Great
That's
stuff.
all right. Very kind.
I've got Just Stop Oiler coming in. We're going to say time for you to just stop. Tax cuts at last. We'll have Jeremy Hunt live at 3:40. Amnesty for illegals. That's got to stop. And Farage with a maggot pizza.
With a maggot pizza. Well, there we go. It's all to come on Martin Dornby. Thank you so much for your company this afternoon. This has been the first episode of Good Afternoon Britain. This is GB News.
Hello, it's Aidan McKibben here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. A lot of cloud across the UK today, with showers continuing in places, but it does turn drier overnight. Tuesday and Wednesday are looking mostly dry across the UK. We've got the weekend's area of low pressure moving away to the east. High pressure trying to build in from the northwest, but in between, a lot of cloud across the UK during the evening. Further spells of rain or showers, especially for eastern Scotland, down the east coast of England. Parts of the Midlands, Wales and the southwest also seeing a few showers for a time before it turns drier later. By the end of the night, the cloudy skies and the showery rain mostly affecting North Sea coastal counties. Drier and clearer skies elsewhere, especially for Scotland and Northern Ireland, where temperatures in some places will dip to -2 to -4 Celsius. So chilly but bright start for Northern Ireland and Scotland first thing. Plenty of sunshine here early on. A lot of cloud elsewhere. Low cloud, mist and fog for East Anglia and the southeast, and some showery rain continuing here into the afternoon. Elsewhere, it's a largely dry and bright autumn day, crisp blue skies, but the sunshine turning hazy across Scotland and Northern Ireland later as the next system starts to move in. That will bring breezy and wet conditions for Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England during Wednesday. A drier and brighter start to the day for the south of the UK, but even here it will cloud over with some spots of rain later. Thursday sees rain sink south, followed by much colder conditions for the end of the week.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you. My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock Monday